I want to welcome to everybody to yet another budget meeting. This might be our sixth meeting, if I'm counting correctly, although I sort of lose track after a while. So we're looking at another budget meeting. The focus of tonight's going to be the CIP, and then we may discuss some other matters, including whether or not we'll have another meeting or not, or how we want to handle moving forth between now and the actual, November 25th meeting, when the council will actually look at the budget. It's going to need to approve a budget. We'll need to approve one at that time to make sure we can get the tax bills out and everything can happen appropriately. So I'm going to turn it over to the city manager. Lead us through tonight's discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the council's packet this evening, we provided you with a revised debt projection. This is going back to the discussion council had about wanting to get our outstanding principal debt down to 70% in a 5-year period. And so we've redone this sheet for you based on the most recent borrowing that we had completed, because that actually helped us a little more. And the if you recall, the right column, if you want to click that, Trina, it's this sheet that you previously got, and it's working in just a second. This one right here, the right column, the percentage of debt limit used. As a result of our recent refinancing, those percentages went down about 0.5%, and it just accumulated through there. So it actually gets us a little closer to our goal a little bit earlier as a result of that. But you can see that the real trick here is to, it's really going to be committing ourselves to that $11.4 million. And within that, we've proposed using a full 1/3 of that $11.4 million after 2015 towards street improvements, because we feel that that is a clear priority as far as infrastructure goes. So you can see the 11.4, it gets us down to 70.45% in 2020, and then you see that we still need to keep it at 11.4. It's all well and good to get there, but we've got to stay there. And I think I read into council's goal that it wasn't just a matter of getting there, it was getting there and staying there. In order for us to stay there, we need to maintain that 11.4 million. Now, the challenge here is that that's remaining pretty static on borrowing for an entire decade. That's going to be a real challenge. The other side of that is we're still making an assumption that equalized value will not decrease. To the degree we have change in equalized value, that percentage will go down by itself without any action by the council. That's a good thing, but we still need to get that number down, and I would think that even if we were able to get that down further, you'd still want that number to go down even as equalized value goes up. But again, that'll be something for councils to continue to debate on an annual basis. So that I just wanted to give that overview. The big thing was with the refi that we did recently, it went down 0.5%, and that's good news. So we believe that we can achieve this, and what you see in the capital improvement plan includes that assumption that it's 11.4 million in borrowing, and particularly Public Works, because they need to plan these projects in chunks as time goes on. All of their street projects through 2019, through 2019 are based on 11.4, 1/3 of that devoted to streets. So you're going to see that as you go through their discussions. With that said, the other thing I wanted to just refresh your memory on was the discussion that we had regarding the prioritization process that we use for the capital improvement programs. And this was something that we discussed. So if you can go back, I forgot that I had that slide. Just make sure I covered everything on that previous slide. You'll see $2.8 million is going to be allocated to streets for 2016. We are assuming at this time that in 2016, $1 million of our $3.8 million amount is going to be set aside to help retire some obligations we have with respect to the special assessment fund. we want to see what our collection behavior is, because I've seen collection behaviors happen where people will pay these off right away, but I don't know if we'll necessarily see it. If you think of some of the areas that we've assessed in some recent years, I think some of those folks may not be in a position where they can finance this themselves. So we are sort of the bank of last resort. So we're being cautious about that, and we're saying we may need to dedicate a full $1 million to just lower the special assessment fund cash balance in 2016. I would love to be able to come and report to you this time next year. We got it all fixed. We're on track. We're in good shape. But we're planning to have that $1 million set aside just in case. After that, we're looking at $3.8 million allocated to streets for 2017 to 19. Reason being is because of the council's directive that we want to get those assessments out within 24 months. Once we get on that paying schedule, we'll be in better shape. Non-street projects for 2017 to 19 are really more fluid, and there's a lot of circumstances that can change for a variety of reasons. So we have not balanced the rest of that $11.4 million for 2017 to 19, but we have done it through 2015 and 2016. And as you can see from the draft agenda, we think it's important to talk about 2016 projects as much as anything. Part of it is because we asked them to fit in the $11.4 million borrowing plan, but even more so, a lot of the things that aren't getting done in 2015 got pushed over to 2016. You'll be able to get a really good idea of what didn't get funded and why it didn't, because there's a lot of really good projects in 2016, and we wanted you to get a flavor for what we did and why we did it. And that kind of goes to the logic in terms of what we did with prioritization. And I talked about this when we had the work session last time, so I just wanted to just at least mention it again. We, for lack of a better term, put our project categories into gotta do, should do, and need to do. And gotta do's had these common themes, and when you take a look at the projects for 2015, you will see that most of them have this characteristics: imminent failure or critical need of replacement, particularly with equipment, contractual obligations, deadlines. I think of taking root and things like that we made ourselves a commitment to. Previously established long-term commitments, taking root. Required for maintaining grant eligibility, those grants that Mr. Davis has been going through with the Riverwalk. Adherence to equipment replacement schedules. That we're talking about things like the quint for the fire department. And then just basic public and employee health, safety, security, and ensuring long-term infrastructure needs are met. Those were the ones we said we got to do these because we got to keep maintaining those types of things. Should do. Do we have one other slide before that? Did we skip over on? We skipped. Need to do. Okay, I'll stay with that one. Should do is continued investment in cultural, recreational, neighborhood development and improvement because it's in our strategic plan. We felt that was necessary. Avoidance of increased maintenance costs, adherence to recommended replacement schedules, the strategic plan, and then trying to avoid getting them into the gotta do's, because when we're telling you we got to do them, there's an imminent problems. To avoid getting you cornered to have to do those things, we want to be a little more proactive with that. So that's kind of the should do. And then the need to is just taking it down one more notch. They're not imminent, but they're nearing the end of their useful life, and we want to have a good replacement schedule. We don't have to replace, for example, we have 10 buses that need to be replaced over the next 4 years. We bought a lot of them in 1 or 2 year periods. We cannot replace 10 buses in a 1 or 2 year period. Just common sense tells you that. So stretching them out over time, but if we put them off too much, we could get ourselves to want to avoid log jams. And plus we want to avoid getting into the gotta-do status. So that's part of the logic that we went through. And when we get into this, I think you'll see with each of these projects you can put them into these categories pretty easily based on the explanation that departments have and just a quick explanation of where we are with those. So that's the prioritization project process that we went through, and that's reflected in the CIP. The next thing, before we get into the project discussion, are those projects that we feel need to get funded through the levy. And we've modified this list slightly from what you even got in Friday's report, because as Ms. Larson and I were going through them, we identified some other projects. We actually caught some duplications that were, because when we were talking to departments, we said, really, we shouldn't be paying for that out of the CIP anymore, meaning we shouldn't be borrowing for it. And the departments put it in their operating budget. So we said, well, we have it budgeted in two places. We caught those. So this is a revised item here. The one that I point out that's added, or two things that are added to this list. One is Taking Root for the 6th year. Taking Root program, it's an obligation, a commitment we made with the Community Foundation 5 years ago, and so now we're entering into its 6th year. But quite honestly, from a capital project standpoint, from a borrowing standpoint, we shouldn't be borrowing for something like that. So as we shuffled some things around, we wanted to maintain that $1,027,500 because I think we should be putting more and more into that. And then as we found a couple other of those that were either put in two places or we just had overstated, you'll notice that the fourth one down says reduce borrowing. Those are for basic street projects. I would love to put a lot more than $30,000 of cash, of levy, into a project, because really what I'm saying is we don't have to borrow for every single street project we do. One day I would like to see that in the millions of dollars, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I think we should be putting for major street projects, just no different than when you're buying a car. If you're buying a car and borrowing for it, do you just finance 100% or do you try to put 10 or 20% down? I think we need to put some money down on these big improvements, just like you do when you do home improvements or car improvements. $30,000 is a mere drop in the bucket. But in order for us to maintain this million plus, I think it's important that we do something. So we just earmarked it for that. Just the fourth one in. It's not for a specific project. It's just saying for projects in general, we need to be getting more cash into it. So that was the area that we, for lack of a better term, plugged in there. Again, one day I would like to see that $1 million or $2 million, because every $1 million or $2 million that you put cash in is $1 million or $2 million you're not borrowing. But we're going to get into these specific items when we get to the areas. So I would ask if you could just bear with me and not ask questions about these, because we do have them in the sections of the CIP. We're just showing you that within the CIP, all of these items are proposed to be paid for with cash. You can talk about them in the context of their areas, and they are in they're in the document itself. So when we get to public property, non-utility, you're going to see these items in there.
But just to clarify, you're saying that this money would be spent in 2015.
Oh, yeah. We would spend it and not borrow for it. We would levy for these.
But it may not, at this particular time, have specifics.
Oh, I'm only talking about the $30,000, that fourth line.
Okay.
That's the only one I'm talking about.
Okay.
Everything else, I mean, parking lot improvements, pedestrian accessibility, LED street lighting. When you look through these things and you see the numbers, a lot of them are $25,000 or less, but they're actually being purchased in small. When you talk about an LED replacement light, you're talking about a $300 replacement.
We don't want to borrow.
We just multiply it by a big number to get to $25,000. We shouldn't be borrowing for those things.
But the same question that Ms. Malinowski asked, is that $30,000 earmarked for anything in particular, or you're just setting that aside right now?
It is earmarked for any and all of the projects that you'll see on page 2 and 3, but there's a couple $1 million worth of projects. So it's just going to reduce that amount that we would borrow for those projects. So we're getting into about half a dozen projects, or four. Okay, we have 4 projects that are streetwise, just themselves, are a couple $1 million. All we're saying is we're going to throw a small, very, very nominal amount at that, just to say, get ourselves in the habit of putting a little cash into it. When we get in each of these projects, you'll see that, but that's what we felt was appropriate to maintain this number. My goal is to maintain this number over $1 million, and I think we just need to continue that.
Quick question in general. Okay, the 11.4 is over here. This is really an addition to the 11.4, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This is,
So in essence, so our capital projects are really 15.4
Oh.
in one sense, although some of these I know come out of the operational.
it's much larger than that.
Okay, I just want,
I'm just trying to give you the,
so really our capital investment is much more than the 11.4.
oh, yes.
I just,
Yep, and I'm going
we
to get
keep
into
saying we're
that.
limiting to 11.4, but
Our
that's
borrowing.
our
Borrowing.
that we're
Our
limiting.
borrowing is
Our
limited to
borrowing, but our
11.4.
capital projects.
And
have
our
been cut
cash-
down to 11.4.
And our cash is limited to $1 million, and that's just for general obligation project. But as we get into some of these, you'll see, so the cash part is something I wanted to make sure that the levy part is, as Ms. Larson points out to me, we're going to fund these projects through levy. And you'll see these in each of the categories. When we get to these categories, we cross-reference the page, so you'll see that when we get to that section of the CIP, we're going to talk about those specific projects. They just happen to be funded with cash rather than borrowing. With that, I wanted to actually draw your attention in 2015 to the very last two pages that are the larger ledger sheets, page 2015-56 and 57. This kind of gets to the mayor's question, how big is the CIP? I'll just draw your attention to 2015-57. It's the end of, in the 2015 section, so it's the very front section, but it's the last two pages that will fold out for you. You only have one, well then you can just look over my shoulder. Oh, did we give,
I have it.
I have two.
oh, you have the different version. Can we get Deb another version?
Does she have the old version?
Yeah.
The one that was originally passed out
The
to us?
updated one in the packet on Friday. You just brought the wrong one.
My apologies.
That's okay. We put it in the 2 pages because the city manager's eyesight's a little challenged, so we'll blame me. Everybody else can use me as cover. But we put it on the 2 pages. I would take you to page 57, and the far right column gives you the total by categories. For example, the top number in that column, $11,625,000 for comprehensive street and utility improvements. But all the way down, with all the categories, our capital improvement plan for 2015 alone is $51.2 million. That's the number I think that you were asking for, Mayor. You can see that in this summary, you can see that the components are a variety of funding sources. There's different borrowings for different utilities. Assessments are $3.2 million. Revenue bonds are $24.5 million. Now, if you flip back to page 56, you'll see that we've subtotaled the general obligation bonds and notes. So you can see our cap is 11.4. We're slotted in at 11,358,000. So we're under the cap that has been established by council to, even though you haven't formally done it, based on all the discussions we have, we've got $11.4 million that we're proposing to borrow for that. You can see the different funding sources. For example, the column on page 56, the middle column that says general fund contribution, that $1,027,500 matches up with the number of that's here on your screen. Those are the tie-ins. So this is what you're paying through the levy. So out of $51 million, $1 million is going to be directly through the levy. $11.4 million is going to be through borrowing, and then a variety of other sources. We're also giving the same discipline to the utilities. You take a look at after the column on general fund contribution, you'll see utility funds contribution over 3 columns, and each of the funds are contributing approximately $1 million in utility cash to cover that. And the idea is the same principle that we're establishing with the general fund. We don't need to borrow for everything. We should be having the pay-as-you-go type of philosophy with some of these things. So we've started to do that. TIF contributions, you'll see there's the other one on this page, $4.6 million through the tax increment financing districts, and then all the other columns throughout the rest of the document. $1.9 million in grants. I mentioned the special assessments already. The bonds of the utility bonds are $24.5 million, and then a variety of other smaller funding sources to get us to the $51.2 million.
I have to ask, what is donations for 600,000?
We will get to each of those. Those are public property improvements, non-utility. I believe some of that's going to come in with parks when Mr. Maurer is talking about park donations. I believe some of that's in there. But we'll get into that when we get into each of those categories because each project will identify if it's being funded with a donation. But I wanted council to see the totality of a sources and uses document, where the money's coming from and where it's going to. And we thought that this was the best way to do it. So Trina and our intern Jubilee really worked hard to be able to frame this for you. So when we get into the guts of the document, you're going to be able to cross-reference all these things. But this is kind of the overview of the whole CIP. But $51.2 million, it's a lot of money. If there's no questions about any of that, I would suggest that we start diving into what I would say more general categories, and then we'll get into more specific categories. And I think the department heads are here to talk about these. The categories, I bounced around in the document itself, but I felt going from general to specific was a little better. But public property is something that stretches across all of the departments, and that begins for 2015. That begins on page 2015-45. So I'll give you a second to get to that page. I'm sorry, I'm looking at. Oh, I'm sorry. It starts at page 38 and ends at page 45. Excuse me. So these are the major projects that we have on the public property. Obviously, the biggest one for next year remains the central garage. Hang on a second. The $4 million for the Public Works Field Operations Facility, that's the largest project that you're going to see. But we also have the $500,000 set aside for the parking lot improvements. However, we are proposing to fund some of that in cash, as you can see from the levy summary. We feel that some of those projects do warrant paying for those in cash.
Mark, is that parking lot improvement going to add to the debt to the parking utility?
Right now, the answer is no, but it is only because I don't want to add more problems to a financial situation that's already pretty dire.
You got municipal parking lots, like this year we did the Riverside. Do we have designated lots that are going to be totally reconstructed?
Jim, if you could come on up for just a minute. Jim's responsibility as transportation director is to review every parking lot that we have, and we've prioritized these. Mr. Strong did it before Jim
Right.
got here, and Jim's been doing it since. So we have a priority list. The biggest priority, which is also the biggest drain on that one, is the eventual reconstruction of the Riverside Park parking lot, which is probably going to cost us over $1 million. So we're going to need to hold some of that money and reserve it for future CIPs. That one is going to be a huge challenge for us. But Jim, if you could just maybe identify some of the lots that we've got as our highest priority.
Actually, what we just commissioned a study to update. We have a 10-year pavement management plan. The first version of that was done in 2010. So I actually have a consultant working on it now. So they should have that back to me within the next month, and that'll give us an idea of which lots need the most attention. This money, though, is basically it covers all city parking lots, so that includes everything in the public, in the parking utility downtown, but it also include, the pavement study also includes things like the senior center, all the parks department's parking lots, some of the fire stations, parking lots. And so what it does is it gives us which lots need to be reconstructed, and then it gives them each a PACER rating from 1 to 10. So what I anticipate doing is taking that study and going from the worst ones and then evaluating it with the city manager and the department heads and deciding which projects need to be funded. We'll look at the PACER rating, obviously, but then again, there's some parking lots that are in really bad shape that don't get a lot of usage, so those would get a lower priority. So that would be the document we would use to identify which parking lots we should do. And to answer a specific question, which ones are the worst, just off the top of my head, the Algoma lot's in pretty bad shape. The Senior Center South is. The 10th Avenue parking lot has no pavement left. It's gravel, but it doesn't get a lot of usage, so it's gotten lower priority over the years. But there are a number of needs. This amount's not even going to be a drop in the bucket to what the needs are.
One of the things one of the things I discovered my first few years here was that departments were all asking for parking lots, and it was difficult to have each department articulate their need relative to other needs. So I had asked Chris Strong at the time, Chris, I want you to assess these, and that's what Jim's referring to, that consultant is going back to that consultant who's been evaluating for us and really tell us which ones are the worst, and worst or first, and that's what we've been following. And I think departments have been appreciating that it's competing for limited dollars, but we're really addressing the ones that need the highest priority first. And part of that was the reason we did the one over by the convention center. Sometimes it is based on usage. I won't lie to you. It is important. If a lot's not getting used at all, its deterioration isn't as big a factor as it is for, say, the one over by the convention center. So that one became a high priority, and we did that one this year. Similarly, there was one on the 200 block that was just in absolutely horrid condition, and we knew we had to get that one done because of how bad it was. And so we did that one a few years ago. What's another one we did this year? What's the museum?
Well, this year we just did the Riverside lot, and that absorbed most of the money from the last couple of years.
But we try to
we
go
did.
through those and really prioritize those projects so that there's one independent view of it rather than all the departments saying, well, I need the parking lots, and then kind of leave it in here for council to have to figure it out. Jim's taken the more objective approach to say, okay, which ones truly need it? Let's get an expert in here. And it's been working the last few years pretty successfully, even with limited money. Some of the other projects, thanks, Jim, the question about donations. I draw your attention to page, there's actually, thank you, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, Senior Center and the museum. Both of those projects are proposed. The Senior Center North, they've got a building fund. They're proposing to get some of their project done, and they've got $300,000 set aside at the Senior Center. And then the refit and construction of the main gallery, to get that started, they're proposing that $100,000 out of the $150,000 for that come out of some of their museum funds. Happy to answer any question you have about a handful of these things. You can see that they run from minor to large. Obviously, the Public Works Field Ops facility is by far the biggest one. Parking's next. Some of those ones that I just mentioned with donations are up there. Grand Opera House carpet replacement. Most of that is 30 years old carpet, and in our agreement with the Grand has always been major capital projects are done by the city. That's in our lease. It's always been in our lease, and given the fact that it's 30 years old, we need to get at that one. if you got questions about any of these, the department heads are here to talk about any of those if you'd like to.
Just one question, it's kind of, it affects a few things, but under page 38, light removal for neighborhood redevelopment, it's showing $200,000 as a state grant and a federal grant totaling 20. What is the city's cost? Is it 200 or is it 180?
It's 180. That would be our cost. Our share would be 180.
So that same thing happens when there's a grant, that we're showing the total cost, that we just have to subtract the grant or the.
Yeah.
Mark, we got 500,000 in roofing and HVAC. Do we know what buildings we're identifying? It kind of lists a study in an inventory, but it doesn't say. It just says
Yep.
prioritize. So
This is the
we could
same-
maybe
Yep.
get what buildings we're looking at.
Sure, it's the same concept that I explained with parking. Instead of having each department come in here and say, my roof's got this issue, my roof's got that issue, we prioritize those lists. And Mr. John Urban, our General Services Manager, in terms of his responsibility for looking at the facilities, looks at all of these, gets them evaluated with McKinstry, and based on our independent evaluation, we prioritize the projects. I believe Brad's getting it done next year, right? Yeah, the museum is getting one done. But what are some of the other ones, Fitz?
I got a little list here. I wish I could put it up on the screen to let you see it, but the priorities for 2015 are City Hall humidifier replacement, that's $20,000. Media services, HVAC improvements, that's $20,000. Both those are carryovers from this year. The Grand Main Hall HVAC replacement, that was pushed back from 2014. That's $150,000. The Public Museum Steiger Wing flat roof replacement, that's $75,000. That's leaking pretty bad now. I think Brad could attest to that. Number 5 that we have on the list is the Sallyport flat roof replacement. That's over at the safety building. That's $190,000. And the reason that's more expensive is because the cement deck has to be replaced. It's eroding there. And the final one on that list for 2015 is Parks HVAC replacement. There's a variety of Parks HVAC issues, and that's $40,000, and that was pushed back from 14 also.
Is that their building or like other buildings at the parks?
We have one that's one of them is a maintenance shop roof replacement. That's another $50,000. And I'm trying to think of the other one. I don't have the details on
okay.
that.
Ray,
Unless you know. Okay.
That's
What
all
we
right.
try to do, and the reason we put it as sort of an allowance, is so that if priorities change, and they have, I've had John Urban come in and say, remember how we told you this was really bad? Well, we found one that's worse. And again, it goes to that imminent failure type of thing. If there's some imminent failure, I will move things around and authorize a different priority. And that flexibility, I think, has really helped us. What I like more in this category, I think John would, I think every department head would, but this, everybody seems to understand. We really worked on this as a group, and I think the departments respect John Urban's opinion because he's using an outside resource to say, yeah, this one is really, really bad versus really bad.
Right. And the reason I brought it up mainly is because it's part of our strategic plan is to maintain our facilities, and I guess it'd just be nice to kind of have a flavor on a regular basis of what facilities we are maintaining. I know we have the priority list and all that, but I think it's important that we council gets kind of kept abreast of what buildings we're maintaining that are ours.
Yeah.
Obviously. We know that, the convention center is an important thing, the Grand's a very important thing, the museum, obviously, the library, all those things are important facilities within, and so I think it'd be good to have council get as much of that information as possible, that when citizens ask, I was at one of these facilities and I noticed an issue, we could say, yes, it's being addressed. So,
Yeah. It's kind of like a sidewalk issue.
Yeah.
You'll hear a sidewalk complaint, and we add it to the list, and if we think it's worse, the Public Works will jump on it a little bit earlier. But we want to maintain the flexibility so that if we need to, we change priorities. But you'll see these come in over the course of the year because we'll come and get a bid award for these things, and generally it's coming from these allowance projects. The big ones like the Grand, for example. That carpeting project, that's big enough to be on its own,
Right.
and
Now,
we put them in that way.
That being said, Mark, on some of these projects like the museum, like the Grand, are those boards and citizens that are involved on those boards and commissions are aware that these repairs are being done to their facilities? So that
I'm seeing Brad.
because I know they ask about it, I'm sure, and continue to push for it, and I just want to make sure that they know we're addressing those issues for them.
Yeah, I think Brad was acknowledging, yes, and Jeff Gildish and Dewey, Vicky's here tonight.
At the last Grand Advisory Board meeting, or for our group, we had discussed that. It was brought up that this was going to be in the CIP for the carpet repairs. So-
Again, I just think those citizens are volunteering their time and efforts, and we want to make sure that their concerns are being addressed in our budgets and then part of our strategic plan to keep our facilities up. So, okay, good, thank you.
Just to make sure I'm reading this right, like for the museum, it says foundations, donations, 100,000. So we're net borrowing 50,000.
Correct. Yeah. We just like to mention, whenever there's a nice little donation or something, we want to give credit, make it stand out.
So with like the carpet replacement for the Grand, though,
There's no donation.
there's no funds, no donation or fundraising or anything to offset that.
Correct.
So the city's picking up the tab.
Yeah.
Mark, on the Great Neighborhoods Initiative, I know we've talked about setting aside $250,000, but are those specific projects? Or is that an amount set aside, and then we'll take the projects as they come?
These are the projects that typically come to council for approval. Alan can probably give a few examples, but we did, Tech Miller Park was the one that the neighborhood had given that one. They've been working actually both with Ray and Alan. But Alan, you can give a couple examples of the Emmeline Cook area. Their neighborhood association actually looked at making some improvements immediately around that area. You recall you did one for a statue rehabilitation.
I'm just asking if these have a number of projects, or this is kind of allowance for projects that are suggested. So is this an allowance figure? Because we had talked about
Yes.
an allowance figure. But like the allowance figure could be 200, it could be 250, whatever. We had talked about the 250 if that's possible. But so this doesn't have a set of projects tied to it at this point
this
in
time, no.
This is an allowance factor.
This is an allowance. And the allowance system seems to have worked because we get
How much
the
did we
credit.
spend last year out of that category?
It was the whole 250. And this year we're partway through, so we spent about half of that money, and the other half I think we'll be bringing to you in the near future. And the other point, we're getting better leverage as time has gone by because, say, the Emmeline Cook project, not only are we leveraging the neighborhood associations, but now the school district and the community foundation have also contributed. So I think we're getting more bang for our buck on some of these projects now, and I expect that'll increase in the future.
On those projects, the neighborhood association project, they bring it forward to city. Who kind of makes the final decision that we're going to go ahead with it?
Planning staff will make a recommendation.
And once that money's in the budget, it doesn't have to come back in front of council for...
Yes, it does.
It does.
Each and every project of that 250 will come back to council for your approval.
Okay.
Like the Tech Miller Park, you awarded
Right.
that project.
We approved, just a couple meetings ago, I think we approved that Washington
Right.
monument at the
Yes.
over off York and Menominee.
Okay.
That, if there's no other questions on public property for 2015, I would ask that you, I know I'm asking you to go through pages and stuff, but I would ask that you go to the 2016 section, page 26, because we're on kind of a roll with this topic, and I think it's important to, some of these things that you're going to see in 2016 were things that were not approved or not recommended for 2015. So if you want to go to 2016, and we'll, or page 26. And you're going to see a similar theme. For example, Great Neighborhoods is in there. You're also going to notice that the Public Works Field Operations Facility is not there, which kind of eases up a lot of things. A lot of similar things. The blight removal's there again. But then you start to see some other things. The fire station roof replacement, they're across a variety of departments. That one we kept as a separate one, even though we have the roofing HVAC because we felt there were enough HVAC projects. So this is one we knew stood out, so we put that one in there. But you can see a variety of them. The library is probably one of the biggest ones in there. With respect to the stone replacement, the council last year had done that building envelope project. They started with that by doing some sealing. Now we're doing stone replacement. A lot of this was done a lot of the work was done 20 years ago when the library was redone, added on and whatnot, and it's starting to show signs of age. And these are things that they've had a consulting firm come in and take a look at this, and it's important that we get that done. Let's see. There's another one, $475,000, site plan phase 2 visitor parking lot reconstruction. Somebody's going to have to help me out with that one. The description isn't helping me out. Phase 2 and 3, visitor parking lot, staff lot. Is that the museum, Brad? Yeah, that's the museum. Okay. Sorry, I got thrown off. So that's a fairly large one, but getting the parking lot, it's in rough shape, and so we're proposing to get that done.
I would imagine same thing with the bus shelters. There'll be we have a list of the ages of each one as they're placed and put out there, which is the oldest to the newest.
Yep. And some just get, because of their, sometimes where they just simply face in the sun,
Sure.
they deteriorate quicker than the other ones.
Now, under transportation, you get the parking lot improvements, and it specifically talks about municipal parking lots this time, not city-owned lots, in a sense. So are you designating or anticipating $350,000 strictly for public parking lots?
I think we're just using those terms interchangeably.
Okay.
You're a good catch.
Hey,
I
huh?
didn't-
Sitting on the Parking Utility Commission, you
Get a
kind of
little
get a little
sensitive to
bit. You catch some of those things, yeah.
No, that's the same allowance. That we-
Okay. Yeah, it's the same dollar amount. I didn't know if we were specifically 1 year designating kind of
No.
less public parking lots and more into the city lots, city facility lots. And the next year, we're just going to designate parking lot.
No,
Okay.
we haven't gotten that far.
All right.
Any questions about the public parking improvements, public property improvements, excuse me, for 2016? If not, suggest we go to public property for utilities. Going back to 2015, 2015-46 and 47. Mr. Brandt's here with Mr. Potzek in case you have any questions. A lot of this equipment, the property improvements, have to do with replacement schedules, but the big one for 2015 is the Marion Road Water Tower replacement. We just hired the firm the other night to begin the work on that, but you can also see some other areas that Mr. Brandt can talk about. They're summarized on page 47. The sodium hydroxide tank replacement and water filtration, that's based on the nature of sodium hydroxide. Things just wear out after a while because of the corrosive factor there.
Page 46, Mark, and maybe Steve can answer it. The walkout lift station, it talks about connection with Blackwell Sanitary District. Does their district help offset any of that cost? If it's tied to their
No, that's the connection point. That's city side. We also have city facilities go into that station. So it's the connection point for Blackwolf, and again, we have an agreement with them to provide sanitary service, sewer service to them, and we take readings monthly and bill based on the flows from Blackwolf. So that's on our side of the system, though. They have their own lift station that they maintain that pumps into it.
Okay. Thank you.
Mark, one quick, with the Marion Road Water Tower, we're saying that engineering design services just began. Is it realistic that they will be completed and we can begin construction in 2015 for completion in 2015?
No, start in 2015, yes, completion in 2015, no. What are you guessing, Dave?
We're guessing a 2-year construction time for that. And again, it depends on a number of factors. Depending on how, how we decide to place it, the property we're placing it on, we've got some other options because of potential availability of a piece of property adjacent to that from the budding property owner, because some of that property is available. So there's some discussions going on with them about where we're going to locate it. If we could construct it on adjacent property and do a property swap, then we could keep the one in service. If that's not going to work out, then we'll have to do planned constructing on that site. But typically, it's going to take 2 years from the time we get the design approved, bid, and get it constructed.
About 2017.
Probably, yes.
That being said, if you take a water tower out of service while you're building another water tower, if it's on the same site, how does that affect the citizens throughout the city?
We've modeled that area, and we take that tower down periodically for cleaning, for painting, for various maintenance activities over time. So we recognize that it puts a little bit of a strain on the area, but there's not going to be any problem providing service in that area with that tower down.
But it doesn't affect the fire department in any capacity?
Well, it may reduce a little bit of their fire flows in that area, but we'll try and accommodate it with additional pumping and things like that.
But I thought, Steve, part of the idea was looking at the additional land was to build the new tower, leave the old tower online.
Exactly.
I was just saying if it ends up in the same spot.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I've seen done in the past is the water folks will catch up on other tower maintenance issues so that they don't have to deal with any tower maintenance issues anywhere else, so that's the only tower that is down and it impacted during construction. I think, as Dave said, Steve's hoping if they can work out an arrangement with some adjoining property owners and maybe do some property swapping, that we might be able to keep the tower up throughout construction while we're building one right next to it and then knock it down. That doesn't happen too often. You're usually you're pretty lucky.
It's
if
an
you
opportunity.
Can pull it off.
Hopefully, we can make that work. The other thing we're doing is we're looking at our tower painting schedule in relationship to this too. It probably is going to mean delaying by a year or two or some of our planned tower painting schedule for some of the other towers, but they're in pretty good shape, and we try and get ahead of the painting schedule. So I think we've got the flexibility. We're not in dire need for the painting on those other facilities to occur, but you will be seeing in the next couple of years a number of tower painting projects as we get all these towers caught up. Usually we get 10, 15, maybe even 20 years between paint jobs, but when we need to get them done, then we need to get them done.
I'd go back to that one point about the walkout lift station. I think we have to look at the agreement, because I'm not sure, even though they connect into us, whether they might have a capital charge, because our station has to take their flow.
That's what I was
So we have to, I think that was on our schedule to look at some of the agreements.
Yep.
Wherever we can get a little help.
Here we go.
Well, that's why you have an agreement.
Yeah.
Would that one potentially come off the list then, if there is an agreement and the town of Black Wolf, or their sanitary
No,
district is-
there
There
would
might be an offsetting revenue.
Yes.
They would pay a portion of it based on their usage of the station.
But it's
they- I mean,
likely
they-
that
they would have
the
to-
agreement would say that there would be a period of time for them to make the payment, that not that there would be just a bill and.
That being said, with
due.
those types of agreements, you said you would need to relook at it. Do we ever renegotiate those once they're in place to maybe benefit one factor or another or something? Or once they're signed, that's it?
No, I think the Black Wolf agreement had within the last 5 years or something. There's been some changes. But that was a project we had knowing that these agreements are old. These sanitary districts have been around for a long time. The question is, should we be updating the agreements, or can we update these? So that's one of the projects to look at.
I guess we should be periodic looking at these agreements and contracts. I mean, if
They typically have a term, so then the question is but are there changes? Should something be done? So something like...
I'm just thinking, some of these townships are growing, obviously, and that's putting more people into the system, and...
Well, those are, that issue is typically addressed in the agreement. I mean, they limit the number of connections, the amount of growth.
Okay.
So...
Okay. And as far as public property for 2016, there's just, I think we refer to it, it's on page 35. The walkout lift station, the next phase is the actual construction, because a lot of that we just talked about was a lot of land acquisition and preliminary work, and then over at the water filtration plant. A little more modest in 2016, because the tower is going to be still occupying a good deal of their time during that period. So it's also cut back because, as Ms. Larson's been looking at our rates and our debt capacity, we still have to, even though we don't talk about debt capacity with the utilities as much, we still need to be mindful that it's not a bottomless source of income there as well. We need to have debt coverage ratios, and cash-wise, we got to be careful. So I think Trina took a look at it and said, we got to scale some of these projects back. So, but you can see that 2016 is a little more modest, primarily because of the water tower.
That being said, too, like with the Bone Street reconstruction, we're going to be taking a lift station out of service or whatever. What do we do with the facility or the land after that? I mean, I know it's a pretty small area of land, I believe, but...
Actually, we've been contacted by WPS because we're right next to their substation.
So they're looking to maybe buying
Right.
it, okay. Do we have any other in the future that we might be taking out of service, or?
We have a number of lift stations that we're looking at. One of the big projects is on Oregon Street. We have a number of pump stations there, and so we have that project going on Snell Road where we're looking at eliminating a pump station. So yeah, wherever we can, we're trying to analyze. It just is more cost effective to use gravity flow than a pump station.
Because anytime we can take public land and put it back on the tax rolls, that's a good thing. Especially if we don't need it any longer for our needs.
We actually aren't looking at it from the perspective
No.
of making money on land sales. We're looking on the money we'll save on operations for the utilities. But yeah,
Sure.
that's a secondary benefit.
Okay, good, thank you.
If there's no questions for Steve, I would ask that we go to the major equipment section. That's on page 2015-48. And we have it broken down into equipment versus vehicles, so you can kind of get an idea. And this is usually a good area where you want to cross-reference the page on what we're funding with the levy, because a good number of these are funded that way when we can. There's major equipment, there's a handful of things in there. Most of the major equipment is on the water filtration side, but a couple of the other big ones that we want to point out, number one, the voting equipment. That voting equipment is in need of replacement, and it's Pam and I were just talking about this because, number one, you weren't running for state office last night. You had no appreciation about the massive improvements that Pam and her staff have done to get the reports out in a much more timely fashion. She went through a continuous improvement process and said, how can we get things out better? And the department heads volunteer to help out with that. And I just use that not to give any credit to the staff that shows up, but normally we've been there for 2-3 hours. I worked a total of a half hour last night. We were done that quickly. We had our first returns come in from the wards at, 8:25, 8:30, 8:26, and we were down to all but 2 districts were done at 10 to 9. So there were just little improvements that were done. Now, to keep that progress going, one of the things that Ms. Uberg and her staff throughout the day recognize that a lot of that voting equipment gets old, and it's not like a piece of mechanical equipment where you can see it deteriorating. Sometimes electronic equipment just suddenly stops working, and it's time to get that replaced. And because of the ebbs and flows in the clerk's office with their budget, I asked Pam to really take a look at these when it's the off-year elections. And so the only elections that are going on next year are local elections, which are our least expensive elections. The gubernatorial and the presidential ones, those are the ones that really are the ones that take the most attention. And to get ready for 2016, we need to get this voting equipment in there now. So I'd probably say Pam having to come up. If you got questions, Pam certainly can handle that. But she's pretty tired. She had a long day yesterday.
Is that replacing all the machines at all the polling sites? Or is it
I'll let
like
Pam answer that.
picking and choosing the oldest to the
Whatever
newest,
deputies.
or as long as you're here?
Thanks. Winnebago County, we tend to purchase all the equipment the same because then we can program and do everything together as a joint versus Nina has one, the city of Oshkosh has another type. So all the machines will be replaced.
And that's how many?
That's 16 for each polling site and then one extra for me.
So you're
The
saying
extra was
we're-
used yesterday.
And yesterday, like Mr. Roloff said, when you look at them, they don't look old, but like the rollers, and Carolyn can testify, we had to go out and replace one of the machines there because the rollers, the ballots just wouldn't go through the machines. And then another site, we had to take a TSX, the touchscreen, because when we tested it, it worked fine. And then yesterday, the cards wouldn't go into the electronic machine, so we had to take a machine out there.
Just from being a poll worker, I mean, if you put something in wrong, the pieces are plastic, it snaps off. I mean, there's legs on things that come right off, and then it falls and you break a light bulb. I mean, they're very fragile items, but, wear and tear. At the end of a long day, sometimes.
Yes, but the goal would be
Machines.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes,
But the goal is to replace all the machines.
Okay.
The other one I wanted to bring to your attention is the fourth item down on the major equipment list, and that's our accounting and finance software upgrade. This $200,000 is really the start of a 3-year plan. This will just get the ball rolling on it, and I think I'm going to have Ms. Larson kind of explain where we are with that, and I don't know if Tony or if it's, I think you can probably speak to it as well as anybody.
Our existing software really has reached the end of its useful life. The support for it is becoming more minimal. It was actually bought out by another company. And so their goal is to get us to convert to another accounting software package. So this is just a good time to begin the evaluation and look at all of the options out there.
I think you found that there's still a lot of manual things that you're doing as a result of how old the software is.
My goal would be in a new software package to have more integration and to produce more efficiency and more automated reporting. What that would do for my office as well as many other city departments would be astronomical and would allow us time to work on other analysis and projection projects versus the manual entry. A really good example would be if you wanted to know right now what would be the total overtime in the 2015 budget. I would say, just please give me a minute, and I would walk out and I would take my budget book and I would sit and add every department's personnel tab overtime line and come back probably in about a half hour and be able to tell you the total amount of overtime in our 2015 budget. It's just having the ability to go through and mainstream and stream some of our processes, our procedures, along with the efficiencies that new software would create, would really change what we can give to you as the council as well as to the other departments with integration.
When would you ultimately look at being able to implement that software?
I would look at it as a year, so 2015 as a year for selection and to set up and to plan and then implement the beginning of 16.
So those two are the biggest ones, but you can see a few other ones in there, and we can answer any of those questions if you do have any questions. Otherwise, we can get into the vehicles and have a little discussion about those as well. But you can see, and when we get to 2016 with respect to the software, you'll see the biggest chunk is really going to be in 2016 for the software. Vehicles, these are the highest priorities of all the departments. When I get into a discussion about gotta do's, most of these are gotta do's. If they're not gotta do's, they are should do's. A good example, the one that stands out the most, is the Quint. It's a 1999 unit. It's actually younger than our oldest Quint, but this is in really rough shape. So we need to get this one done first. Chief's already spending, what'd you already guess when you first made your pitch to me? You'd already spent about $35,000 this year alone. I'll talk a little bit more to get the chief up here, but $35,000 is about the price of a pickup truck that's right after that. And I purposely put it there so you could see the $35,000 the chief spent could have paid for a pickup truck in the Parks Department. That's how much maintenance that the chiefs haven't been doing on that.
And we have a imminent repair that we'll be doing within a week on it. That's probably going to be close to another 10, just in order to keep it operational. That's the swivel on the turntable that allows the water to flow through the ladder and the hydraulics. That whole, it's a pretty sophisticated mechanism, and it's it's kind of every time we use it right now, I hope it works and that we can get it to come back down again. So it will hopefully have a little bit of used vehicle value in it, but if we don't make that repair, well, number one, it won't be operational right now, and two, it won't have any value when we're finished with it. So
What's the lead time on ordering?
that's 9 months. So from the time that we're able to complete the borrowing for next year and be able to make that order, then it'll be 9. So it'll be nearly this time next year by the time we actually get that vehicle in service.
And we have some type of an agreement, though, where we could use one from another community, though, if we needed two at the same time, right?
Well, it's mutual aid. It's in service in their community, and when it's available, but it's our closest ladders are in Neenah, Townham, and Ash, or Ripon. Those are our mutual aid cities. So we're 20 plus minutes out if we're down without that apparatus. So.
And the Quints are at the main fire stations, or are they spread out throughout the city?
One is assigned out at the Station 14 by the airport on the end of Knapp Street, and the other one is on the corner of Algoma and Murdoch, stationed by the cemetery.
And then I see there's one on. You're looking at a replacement of the other one next year.
The following year,
2016,
yeah.
sorry.
And some of the things we'll look at as we're making that deal. Actually, I just met with Pierce this afternoon. Some things that we'll see what we're going to be able to do if we can order them both at the same time. We can get additional discounts and lock that price in. So those are some of the things that we'll work through purchasing and see what we can do, because we're looking at that we do have that commitment for the other one in the 2016 CIP, so there could be some significant savings, and maybe set the order up in such a way that the second one gets built, kind of phase it in like we did with the city garage that we're moving along, something like that respect, so we don't have to wait again until almost 2 years down the road before the second one gets here, because we still have the same maintenance issues that are cropping up with those. If it happens to one, it's just a matter of time where we're going to see that same problem with the other one.
It's on the verge of a gotta do, and obviously this one bumped up because of how much we're spending on it, and it's really in imminent danger of failing. They'll figure out a way to get it re-upped, but if it takes a couple days and we're down, we may have to rely on mutual aid. That's not always the best situation. I mean, the first thing is they'll come from another station, but then that station's bare, and we want to make sure that we've got that coverage.
What happens to the old quench then?
I did talk to Pierce about that, and they said if we make these repairs that we're doing, that it could serve some life in a smaller community where it's making, a few runs a year versus what we do with it.
Or that piece of equipment?
They don't take them on trade, but we would have to sell that outright, and their guess was that it may have a value of, somewhere in the $70,000 to $100,000 range in there, possibly. That's if it holds up well through.
Yeah, I was going to ask just that question of all the equipment when it comes to vehicles. I mean, is there any kind of revenue stream from potential resale value? I understand it's probably minimal compared to the cost of buying new.
Yeah, we'll always try to do that. Look to see what we can do. We wait until it's done to see what kind of salvageable life it has, especially for the large ones. It really comes down to what kind of condition is in at the end. I've seen sometimes where it's been cannibalized for parts, and other cases where it's been donated to third world countries that would look upon a truck like that with only a few calls a year as somewhat without the standards that the chief has to hold here in the States. It can get by.
The last two we had, one went to Nicaragua, and the other one went to the salvage yard. That's how well used it was.
But we can factor in the salvage value, and that can go either offset borrowing or used to another project in here.
Well, I think that I would direct it to go to offsetting additional borrowing.
Yeah. That's generally what happens. There are a bunch of other vehicles. I just don't want to use the chiefs. I mean, there's some inevitability to that one. But there are a lot of vehicles in here, and I think each department can explain a lot of them. Parks, there's a lot of parks vehicles in here. 15, 20 years of regular use year-round. Similarly, in the street department, you can see, or the street division, you can see a lot of these vehicles. Some are 20 years old, some are only 10 to 15 years old, but in each of these cases, these are well beyond the useful life. Mr. Ewan is here, and he can give you a long, detailed maintenance history of each of those vehicles, how many hours are in service, how much, what I asked Kevin to do. Kevin, why don't you come on up just in case, because I asked Kevin to give me a maintenance history, and you can see that at a certain point, the maintenance costs just start to skyrocket. And once it hits that level, that's probably as good as indicator as any that it's time to replace those vehicles.
Right. We don't just look at the age. We look at the whole picture. Like Mark said, the maintenance history, the cost to operate that equipment. Some of these that are on the list are currently sitting in the yard because they don't operate anymore.
Oh, I can relate to that. There's no questions.
I take it that, just curiosity, that $80,000 for that Trail King trailer, I take it that's one that hauls the great big equipment?
That's correct, and that's we're looking to buy a used, so we may hopefully get a better deal than that.
Oh, okay.
Mark, just a comment I want to make so that the citizens understand, too, is that, many of us have done the departmental tours, and we either did them, last year, a couple of years ago, and there's been conversations, so we've seen some of the equipment, and we've seen some of the stats on how they're run. That's part of the reason why we're not really necessarily questioning it. we've seen it in person, so I want the citizens to understand that's not that we're just, blanketing, kind of going through here. It's just that we have a true understanding that we have a lot of things that should have been replaced a long time ago, and we're taking care of them pretty much, as Mr. Roloff said, because we're just at a point that we have to.
When you get taken for a ride in a vehicle that doesn't have a floorboard and you're asked to have a seat and be comfortable, I keep my feet in the air on those rides.
You're describing cabs in New York.
Maybe that's where we can sell these vehicles to when we're done. If there are no other questions, Mr. Mayor, I would ask that you go to 2016 so that we can talk about the 2016 vehicles, because the ones that ended up getting cut from 15, first things first went to 2016. I'd go to major equipment first. You can see the accounting finance software. That's a 3-year. The second year is $800,000. We're estimating this could cost about $1.2 million when all is said and done. So I didn't want to just, if we'd only talked about the 2015 CIP, you wouldn't have been able to appreciate the volume of that. And I wanted to make sure you see that this is a $1.2 million investment. We've got the last $200,000, basically clean up, as somebody said, just kind of like the Public Works garage. A little, a lot, and then a little more at the tail end. Given the fact that we haven't had this software replaced in over 20 years, we're getting ourselves back up to speed. But that's going to be a huge chunk to bite off in 2016. You can see some of the other things with the street division with some equipment, general services, the video equipment for our government meeting coverage. In the past, we used to get a lot of money from the cable companies to do that. That is not necessarily the case anymore. And our equipment is starting to get dated as we do more internet and more live streaming. The equipment needs to be different so we can do that. So we're looking at a pretty high price there. I've asked Andy to do his best to keep the stuff we do have going for one more year. We are replacing a little bit of equipment this year, and then 2016 is really when we're going to have to, those little bubbles, either the bubbles that we have here in this room or the cameras there, they just seem so easy, but they've been moving a lot for a lot of meetings for many years. So that's $118,000, and then there's a variety of other items with the water distribution and wastewater plants that are in there as well.
Just a question, and maybe the chief can answer this one a little bit. I notice there's 3 ambulances in there. Does it make sense to buy them all at one time? Or I know we got more than 3 ambulances, but wouldn't it be almost better to stagger them a little bit so that life expectancy kind of goes out there a little bit? Or
Well, we have 9 altogether, so we're the replacement cycle that we're at right now, which would be difficult we'd have to accelerate that. Just kind of, we did have it kind of split 1-2, but we've kind of gotten ourselves into this cycle, and it's about 4 years as we're going right now. We get do about 40,000 miles per year. So by the time we hit this, I'm expecting the 3 that we're going to replace will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 110 to 120,000 miles. So that's pretty heavy for an emergency vehicle. And like Kevin said, we monitor them and look at not just the standards but our maintenance records. And they hit that point where that's where they start really taking their toll on us on maintenance cost.
do we rotate them? Like, we cover the townships, so obviously the ones that are out in the county might have more miles than the ones in the city. Do we rotate them around to kind of balance the mileage?
They actually are. We monitor that pretty closely too. They're fairly well balanced on how we use them, because one of the ambulances, even the one at Station 15 downtown, may end up taking a call out in Amber when the other ones are busy, or some of the interfacility transports, they may take a patient down to Milwaukee or Madison, for example. So they actually stay relatively close. Even their call volume is pretty even on how we've got things located strategically. What does happen, what the 3 that are our primary ambulances right now will get rotated in as a cross-staffed ambulance, and so they go through phases. In their last step-in services. There are backup or reserve units that we then use for special events, just because they don't get as many miles and we're, using them more locally.
Yeah, we have, 2 or 3 tiers of how we do that.
Yes, yeah. There's 3 tiers. There's the primary ambulances that get the most use, and then they move into cross-staff service, and then finally reserve status.
Is the option available at the point to purchase those together to get a discount?
Yes, yeah, no doubt that's another advantage is, getting the discount on them, because it takes all the extra design cost and then just by the volume.
And plus, the other thing that we've talked about is the buying them together in addition to the point Councilor Pansky points out. The other advantage is you get them to be about the same, so that when you're dealing in a medical situation, doesn't matter where you're assigned, you turn around and the stuff's in the same spot every time. You're not saying, oh, in this unit, I'm in unit 1, so it's the 3rd drawer, and the other unit, it's in the 4th drawer. When seconds matter, they know exactly. It's sort of like your own kitchen drawer. You know where the forks and knives are. They know exactly where those things are because they're in the exact same place every time.
Yeah, that's a key.
But you can see there's a variety of other ones in there. We've got the buses. There were 2 in 2015, and there's 3 of the buses in 2016 for transit. I believe our replacement schedule for the buses is 2-3-3-2. Is that right, Jim? So you're going to see that throughout the life, and we want to spread those out. Going back to our criteria, technically they're all supposed to be replaced over 1 or 2 years. Well, that's just financially just not possible. So we're going to identify which ones need the most replacement based on their maintenance history, and it's 2-3-3-2 for the next 4 years. And there are a variety of other ones. I can happy to answer any questions or get the department heads up here. You can see a lot of parks, 4 or 5 type of categories of vehicles, and probably 7, 8 or more with streets. We're trying to get 1 plow in every year so that we are regularly doing that. And then a variety of other pickup trucks. You can see CNGs in there. And Kevin's become a big proponent of CNG. If we can get CNG, if we can make it work, we're going to make it work.
So what's the difference between those and say like the one at the bottom for like $85,000?
That is Mr. Brand's to answer. Kevin will say, because I'm more efficient, but that would be unfair to Mr. Brand. Stephen, come on up, please.
It likely would have things like winches.
Right, we're replacing a
lift pumps.
pickup truck with a pickup or a utility maintenance vehicle. In other words, it's going to have all the side boxes, the tool boxes. It's going to have a winch on back for pulling pumps out of lift stations, so that we can do a better job of equipping this truck for the maintenance work that the folks do out on our 16 lift stations. So we do lift station rounds and maintenance. Right now we're just working on a pickup truck. The tools are in buckets or toolboxes in the back. So we're upgrading that truck, and so that's going to be, if you see something like transportation, if they've got to go out and work on a bus or something like that, you'll see one with the toolboxes and everything built on it. I think Streets has one for maintaining trucks out there. It's got all the boxes, all the equipment and everything is on that truck. So it's made specifically for handling tools and
You also look
winches
at
and things like that.
Put snow removal equipment on some of your vehicles? I'm
We
not
do.
sure if
We do
that
have
one-
snow removal equipment on a number of our vehicles. I don't think this one would be one we'd have that on, but we have to clear snow at all our lift stations, our facilities, both water and wastewater. So.
Does this include the winch? Is that why it's?
I believe it does include the winch setup too. I don't have the details on it, but I'm pretty sure that would be included in there, but I can't say for sure.
If there are no questions on that, I think what we want to do is start getting into some of the improvements themselves. The equipment and property, we've been bouncing a lot of folks. Now we're going to be a little more specific. We're going to do parks now, park improvements. The Parks Board goes through a lot of these, does their prioritization. Mr. Maurer meets with me and goes through those as well. Park improvements start on page 2015-36. Come on up, Ray. Yeah.
And Mr. Herman, as you said before, yeah, the Parks Board thinks that we evaluate all these projects, and they all believe that they're just never, ever going to get done, because there's people on that board that have been there for 10,
Long
15
time.
years, and they
Never see anything
seen the
happen.
requests, and they
Yeah.
so they're glad to know when these things get approved.
Many of these projects also come forward from the neighborhood groups. I think the Stevens Park restroom facility is one of those that the neighborhood group has really been pushing for, and we are designing currently. So that was one that, again, we work closely with the neighborhood associations on. And the other one, the South Park restroom facility, is one of our oldest facilities out there. Again, more comfortable in a prison toilet probably than what you are in the South Park, just with the metal facilities and with it being heavily used. That's very well needed.
With, there's only two there. If you could go to page 2016-23, these are the ones that were the next level of priorities for the Parks Board. Page 23 in 2016.
Oh.
There's a longer list there.
2016.
Ray, if you could talk about those projects.
Sure. The Menominee Park improvements, that's part of the Menominee Park plan that we recently accomplished a couple years back. What we'd be looking to do in here would be improvements to the tennis court and basketball court, and then if there'd be funding available yet, we would look at doing some park path improvements. But our current estimates for the tennis courts is going to eat up a good chunk of that. So we're looking to get some improvements done there. West Haven Park ball fields, list $135,000. What we would do is typically work with some of the youth organizations. Again, we've been successful in working with the Girls Fast Pitch, OYB, other organizations, the Softball Commission. A lot of those groups will help us to do some of the funding for some of these projects as well. When you take a look at the restrooms, again, Tech Miller and West Haven Park restrooms, when we did our comprehensive outdoor recreation plan a couple of years back, that was one of the biggest complaints of the citizens, was the facilities, the restroom facilities. So we've been trying to do upgrades to the restroom facilities. What we do is essentially go in and do a complete demolition of the interior, and then we're putting in high-efficiency lighting, high-efficiency plumbing, and making sure that it's ADA compliant. And then, speaking of the ADA compliance, we've got a number of accessible routes to the play equipment and perimeter walks. We talked about that a little bit during our budget session. We've been doing that at our playgrounds, most recently at Bauman Park and Stevens Park, as well as at Tech Miller. We put up to make sure they're more accessible for those individuals.
There was discussion on the Riverwalk by the old railroad bridge of a boat launch for kayak and canoe and bathrooms. Is that part of your budget, or does that come under?
That'll be under Mr. Davis and some of the, I believe, some of the,
even though
some of
that's
the
going to
TIF
be
funding.
a park thing,
Correct.
right? And that'll be maintained by the parks?
That's correct. I believe it might be in the TIF funding,
Okay.
so it'll be coming
Probably
up
is.
later
I
on.
just didn't see it here, but we'll
Yep.
get to the TIF funding. So.
And that'll be, I believe, a 2015 project.
Okay.
This is just an operations question, but the lighting that's in the parks, is that part of the street lighting? I mean, is that all, at least as far as or do you have a separate budget for that? For those electrical.
Yep, those are through us, and you'll see a number of those in the parks plan. Aber-Ashland Park lighting, Tech Miller Park lighting. Those are some of the old fiberglass poles that have been that kids like to rub their hands on and get nice and itchy from. So what we've been trying to do is come up with a replacement plan. We work with the electric division on a lot of the installation, but they are our poles. What we've been doing is modeling those after some of the new developments, the poles that are going in the new developments, so we do have interchangeable parts. Makes it a little bit easier for us to maintain as well.
Okay. But and from the operating standpoint,
In his budget.
It's in my budget.
These are in his budget.
Okay, but the electricity that we're paying for, like when we have that 1 million, whatever line item for street lighting.
That's for street
just
lighting.
streets. It doesn't.
Yep.
That's correct.
Is there any value in the lighting when you do take down those poles? Do you just scrap those, and do we recoup any cost from that, or what?
His scooter here,
yeah.
Dan Koosman is a master at reusing and recycling a lot of this stuff. Yes, I mean, you saw the boneyard where he just, he cannibalizes anything and everything. And I say it with all due respect, Scooter is very creative at making sure we don't just throw something
What's
out
your
in the
term?
trash.
Frugal?
That fair statement, Jim?
I use Mr. Peck's term that he uses all the time. Scooter is very frugal. So he makes sure that whatever we can reuse, we can reuse.
Where are we at? I think council, a year, maybe 2 years ago, we put money aside for a specific park, kind of a
An inclusive playground?
inclusive playground.
Glad you brought
That's
that up. That is actually, if you recall, the council had committed $100,000 and challenged the group that was raising funds to raise $100,000.
Right.
And we're in some conversations with the community foundation to finalize that fundraising. We're very close to reaching that $100,000 goal and potentially a little bit more. And had a meeting with Mr. Roloff recently, and we're looking at, hopefully in the spring, we might be able to bring something forward to council as far as moving forward with that project.
Where would that be located again?
At South Park?
Originally was going to go at Rockland, but after all was said and done, it just makes more sense at South Park, especially when we did the master plan for South Park. It'll just fit in better there.
Yeah.
But the group's getting there. It took a while, but they're getting close, and that's so the funds are still there, waiting to get their match.
That being said, where does that show up in the budget?
It's capital improvements are non-lapsing accounts, so those funds are still there from a few years ago, and we've been patiently waiting for this group to step forward. It's already been borrowed for. In fact, if anything, Ms. Larson has to make sure that we aren't into arbitrage issues, so we spend that money on another park improvement so that she has to juggle the money so that we don't run into what are called arbitrage problems, and that's really the bulk of Ray and Trina's conversation yesterday, was how we make sure we don't get into those issues. But they've got it covered. I'm very proud of how they did it, but the money's still there.
I appreciate your term, juggle the money as opposed to cook the books.
Just in case the arbitrage.
Arbitrage.
We are
That's a big
appropriately
word.
spending the money in the order in which it's really first in, first out. That's what we do. But the real trick there is we have to use it for park improvements. So we had to go through all of Ray's park projects and say, okay, we got to make sure we spend this money first, because we got to spend the borrowed money first before we spend the next borrowed money. Any more questions of Mr. Maurer for 2016 parks? If not, we're going to go to traffic improvements. Those are start on page 2015-34. Most of these are actually cash. In fact, all of them are cash, mainly because even though the total amount may be, in this case of traffic signal equipment, over $45,000, when you break it down, it really is. They're small pieces. So 3 projects. LED, we're doing a lot with trying to replace at the signals as well, because it saves us money in terms of electricity. And Mr. Collins is here. If you have any questions about these.
Jim, I would assume like on knockdowns, we try and get reimbursed
Right.
the insurance costs and.
Yep. We do as much as we can. Unfortunately, we don't always get them reimbursed, but we try.
The hit and run.
Yeah. Yeah, most of this, like you said, Scooter's very frugal, so most of these items for 15 and 16 are things that are probably going to be on here pretty much annually. the traffic signal equipment. We reuse what we can, but controllers, cabinets like those we have to replace eventually. They outlive their useful life. The LEDs, those last about 10 years. We replaced all the signal heads at the city-owned traffic signals within the last 10 years, but they have about an 8-year life, so we have to go through and replace them. And Scooter has a schedule for when those are scheduled. And then the pedestrian countdown signal heads. We have 67 intersections in the city, and we're actually taking over a few more from the state on 44. But basically, what that does is it replaces the walking man, if you will, with the countdown. You'll see now we're going to the 2019, which everybody still seem to be really popular, and we're trying to get those replaced. We have about a third done now. By the end of the year, we anticipate having about a half done. And then the other things that we're trying to do is eliminate flash at night on intersections, because that's leads to a little bit higher crash level. So what we're trying to do is go to activation. So some of this helps pay for cameras that are used to identify when vehicles approach, so then it'll turn the lights. But as we do that, some of the intersections where we don't have pedestrian signals, we need to put push buttons in. So if a pedestrian wants to cross, they can push the button to get the signal to come. Otherwise, if it's on that actuation, it wouldn't turn for a pedestrian.
I see we put them in on Bone Street.
Yep.
Going to New York.
Yep, that's the most recent one. So for 16, it's real similar.
16, the only change is that we are proposing to finally get the 9th and West Haven signal in there. Even Caroline's new, and she knows about it. Everybody knows about it. But it's, I know that's been an issue that's been out there. It's not that we've been trying to put it off, it's just trying to fit it in when we have the funds. And so we do have the 2016 CIP balance with 11.4. That's $85,000. Now, there's also some intersection tweaking that we need to do as well, right, Jim?
Yep.
That was probably as much a factor as the signal itself. But it will be done. That's all I have with traffic. The next set of projects are the TIF projects. In 2015, they begin on 2015-51. Mr. Davis could come on up and talk about his projects. A lot of Riverwalk projects. But we also have things in there such as Railroad Spur for the Southwest Industrial Park, and then some blight removal, neighborhood redevelopment, Marion Road remediation. That's a big one. There's a lot of projects here. The real challenge here is a lot of the money is donation from TIF 7. Probably as much an issue of importance as anything.
The pieces I'd highlight would be the grant funds that we got there at the Geldwin, or the Morgan District east of Oregon. We'll be starting that next year, actually completing it, since it should be a relatively short construction for that piece. We think we need to design the rest of the property, because we found that when you chop it up too much, it's hard. You spend a lot more money on the design and the permitting process, and we just soon get that entire length permitted, because it's going to take multiple years to construct it through the Morgan District. Let's see, and the big item on the Marion Road redevelopment area, those are all based on projects that we're working with potential developers on as we speak. So in 2015, I'm hoping we'll actually have construction on those 3 sites. So we have to do the I think I've mentioned in the past, I wish I could sell it for $1 and not spend any more money, but every one of those sites have hundreds of thousands of dollars of remediation that has to be done before anybody can really build on those.
And that's remediating an issue that was created, that the owners created the issue are gone, and we can't attack them for funding?
Correct. These were
cleaning up somebody else's mess.
Unfortunately, from hundreds of years ago.
This goes way back to our heritage of our industrial land out there.
and all the filling and the different construction and the different manufacturing processes that were involved over 150 years.
Are there any kind of grants through like the EPA or anybody?
EPA will be almost impossible to get at this point in time, but we will be pursuing through WDC if we have a good project that would fit, that would produce what WDC is looking for. But until we actually have that package put together, I hate to promise we're going to be able to get those grant funds. But definitely, our goal would be to get grant funds for every project.
Okay. On the South Shore East, how far are we going on Pioneer Drive?
From Main Street over to the railroad tracks. And that's just design. We're not building it. We're just starting the design process.
You're anticipating or hoping to get some grant dollars there too, like you have with the
absolutely.
rest of the Riverwalk?
I don't see us building a section of the Riverwalk without grant funds being a major piece of that project. I mean, we've had a successful batting average up to this point, and I think we're well positioned to continue that in the future, assuming state and federal funds are also still available in the future.
Yeah, I think our projects are very well regarded because they're directly on the river. It's redevelopment. There's so many, when you're looking at the point system that the DNR looks at when they're looking at these types of projects, we rank very high because there's so many different categories that we do well in. And we're on a roll. We keep going with those things, but we also have to get projects done. You'll recall that one that we just did with the over by the Boatworks property. We wanted to close it out, so because Alan goes through and makes sure that we can maximize our points on every single grant. And one of them is how many grants do you have open. If you have too many grants open, the perception is that you're not using money that they've set aside, so they'll give it to somebody else. So we try to close these grants out as quickly as possible so we can keep our eligibility up.
And going back to that South Shore, does that incorporate closing off of the Pioneer Drive Road and everything, incorporating that?
The long-term plan, yes, it is.
Okay.
Because most of the Pioneer Drive right-of-way will be used for the Riverwalk project.
Okay. And then unless we get some agreements or something, we're not going past the railroad bridge?
Not at this point. We can, although we do have the right, we do have the easements to go there, but
I wouldn't support funding anything until that gets cleaned up or something done with it, because...
I would just ask you to keep an open mind.
yeah.
If anything, our staff is opportunistic when it comes to these grants, and so we'll keep pursuing them until they tell us no.
Just follow up to the grants. Mr. Cummings and I attended a session at League of Municipalities related to development of your parks and stuff like that, and much of it was on water, rivers, or lakes. And one of the things they cited was to take access any grants that you possibly could. And I applaud Mr. Davis and his staff for doing this, because when you look at, on the Geldwin, the east of Oregon, it's almost half of the cost is a grant. And on the boat works, it is half of the cost. So leverage is a good thing.
Just as an aside, there is an item on Tuesday's council agenda to award a contract for the design work. The scope of that work, Alan,
The design's actually done. This is for the construction inspection and the bidding, going through the whole process there. And I expect that to be on the agenda. No guarantee right now, but I want to make sure it's right before it gets on the agenda.
Mr. Davis, just a question regarding the blight removal, the 200,000 for there, or 180,000. Are we actually tearing anything down, or is that just?
No, no. We would acquire and tear something down, and we didn't do that this year, but I like to put it in there just in case. Again, we want to be opportunistic in that if there's a piece of property that can help in the redevelopment of the South Shore, I don't want to come to you next year and say we have this really great deal that will help the redevelopment of X property, and you not say, well, where is it in the budget? I mean, if it's here, at least I can have that conversation. We didn't use it this year, but I could see using it potentially in another next year.
So we don't necessarily specifically have something in mind right this minute?
No, not right this minute.
when you don't use it this year in the situation you're talking about with the funding for the soft surface play area at the park, that doesn't necessarily roll over. I mean,
We're not rolling these over,
okay,
because
we're
these
just
are
keeping
just
it.
being
It comes up annually.
place marker type of thing.
Great.
And we don't borrow for it then.
Right. Thank you.
These are the ones we really got to keep track of, because we don't want to run into that danger of over borrowing unnecessarily. So we keep track of those. And you'll notice that that's identical in structure to the ones that were under property improvements. Those ones are in non-TIF areas. These are for TIF areas. So that's why you'll see it's 200,000 with 10,000 from the feds, 10,000 from the state. We just have that set aside. If we have an opportunity, we go at it. And if we can find a property that meets that criteria, we'll go after it, and we'll seek some state or federal grants if we can do that.
But once a property is identified for demolition, it's a long, drawn-out process, too.
If we don't have the funding for it, it absolutely is. Then we're depending on the kindness of Department of Public Works to tear it down when they have time.
Generally, we use the grant money for the acquisition, correct? To make it simpler?
Yes, although we did get grant money from WIDA to tear down some blighted properties in Middle Village, so I can't say for sure. We're opportunistic when it's available. We'll get it for demolition as well, absolutely.
I will point out that, I think council's familiar with a lot of these projects. The donations from TIF 7, Ms. Larson and her staff, along with Mr. Davis and his staff, are going through how we're going to work through the TIF 7 funds in terms of retiring TIF 7 in a couple of years and making sure that we have adequate funds. So they've been going through a series of analyses. We'll be providing that to council later on, so you know how we're going to get down to that. We still have, what's the amount we have in that fund right now? Is it still about 15 million? Or is it
Somewhere
down
in that
12?
range.
It was about 13 on that sheet you gave us earlier.
I think, yeah, down by the end of the year, I think we're going to have a little over 12, but it's probably going to be going about half every year for the next couple of years until it's essentially gone. So we want to make sure that we don't overcommit. Meanwhile, that's also serving, TIF 7 is serving as help cash flow the special assessment fund so we get that worked out. And we're bringing those two together so that we make sure we don't put ourselves in a, and we'll be providing that information to you later on. You saw earlier, that's why when Ms. Larson and I went through the streets, we said, well, we may need to set aside $1 million of street money for cash flowing the special assessment fund. The special assessment fund will eventually get itself whole, but it is kind of I hate to use the word pyramid scheme, but it is, you rely on past funds to get repaid for the future, and it becomes a cash flow issue. And pyramid schemes typically fall apart because it's a cash flow issue. We want to avoid that, and because we've been doing more projects recently, it's created a bigger pinch on our revenues.
Yeah,
And-
there's a guy in jail that did a pyramid.
I
I want
know.
to stay away from that.
Yes,
Yeah,
we want to avoid those things.
And if you look at 15 and 16, you're looking at over $9 million in commitments out of between 12 and 13 million. So over the next 2 years, just on these two areas, it's pretty well committed.
We project that we're down to about $2.5 million by the end of 16.
That would be, with the stuff that's in here, that's about right.
Yeah. So then we have to overlay that with the cash needs of the special assessment fund. Now that we've got the bills out, the cash is starting to come in. The question is how quickly does the cash come in? If somebody decides they want to do a 15-year payment, that's going to be tougher. If somebody says, I just want to get this thing paid off and get it off my books, I don't want to pay 6% interest. If they pay it off, that helps us. So those are the types of, we're going to be looking at the behaviors, particularly through this upcoming tax season, when we'll really get a first big splash of bills out there and see how the residents are behaving in terms of paying these bills. And I think we'll get a good indicator of what pattern you'll see in the future. As the Mayor said, there's a lot of them in 2016 as well, and that begins on page 2016-38. It looks the same, but they are different projects. A lot of trails, a lot of remediation. I don't know much more than ditto, Alan, other than just, we're continuing to move east with our trail system.
I see you do have 800,000 budgeted for the Pioneer Island design.
Correct.
Hopefully we'll have some resolution of that property. Otherwise, I would have a hard time supporting $800,000 taxpayer dollars for blighted property.
I concur.
So that, you might want to put a question mark on.
Oh, we'll be having this discussion next year, I'm quite sure. Because I know council's not going to change their thoughts on that.
No, not my time on this council.
If there are no questions in that, I would suggest we go to comprehensive street and utility improvements. The core of our capital improvement plan, as I mentioned earlier, as Dave and Steve come up, we have $11.4 million, and we're allocating $3.8 million, not in 2015, but beginning in 2016 for that. And I think it's worked well in the past, and Dave and Steve and their staff have prepared this this map that identifies by color coding what our priority streets are, to kind of give you an idea. Now, Public Works has taken that $3.8 million allocation, and they have programmed the entire 5-year CIP with that $3.8 million. With that said, as you know from your experiences on the council, that can change, but they are working towards this because it's helpful for them to be able to program that out, recognizing they might have to tweak it every once in a while. With that, on page 2015-2, big projects are East Parkway and Mount Vernon. A lot of utilities there. We televised, videotaped the sewers on Mount Vernon, and they were, when I talk about gotta do, imminent failure, this is the project I was thinking about. It is in very, very poor shape, and I don't think I can underscore that enough. And Dave and Steve have been the ones that have viewed the tape, and they can attest to it. We're just hoping we don't have a winter problem.
It came to light as a result of a couple of collapse that actually happened on Mount Vernon. Pipe collapsed, went to repair it, tried to get the televising camera in there, couldn't get the camera through. They were able to work it through a little bit. The pipe is in very dire need of replacement.
Since this came from kind of out of nowhere, in a sense, how far out have we've notified all the property owners up and down that street? That
We had everyone, everyone was notified with our neighborhood meeting. So we have, I don't know, something like 225 people involved with this year's paving or the 2015 paving program. And I think we had about maybe 10% of those people show up for our neighborhood meeting.
Because we all know how that works. When they finally get the notice that the street's going to get done, then the panic sets in and everything, so.
Well, there was one letter sent out already.
Yeah, they received a letter that talked about the neighborhood meeting, which was a week ago Monday, and it also had tonight's date in it for the workshop.
You'll recall that there was a column in the guest column in the paper several months back about East Parkway, and East Parkway and Mount Vernon are connected both literally and figuratively. As they were looking at Mount Vernon in anticipation of East Parkway was also, the indicator was that there were collapses, but when they did the inspection in terms of the due diligence of, well, do we need to do East Parkway, they took a look at Mount Vernon, and that's when they discovered how bad it was. So that person is getting their wish, not necessarily because East Parkway was in such poor condition, because at a point, these guys are getting ready to take it off. It wasn't until they looked at Mount Vernon, and you got to connect the two. They're just, you got to do it. So that's why we're doing both.
Well, when you can when you, and it's good information when you have in there that the Parkway, the sanitary is 1887, 1939, 1940, and the water is unknown. So that's pretty old system. Same thing with the Mount Vernon setup. It's basically, they must have been built together, the two streets back in 1800s.
Now, on there, what's the date for the streets? That says, there's not a date for streets on these, or is that implied?
Date for the original street construction?
The last date the street was done.
Okay, so,
Because that's often what people say, is they just came through and did my street 10 years ago.
Yeah.
yeah, that
That's
wouldn't.
what we hear most often. They don't know about the other.
If you
but that's
look
what
on
we
the
hear.
top of each section where it talks about the PACER rating, and it talks about a PACER rating of a 2 or a 3, the scale is 1 to 10, 10 being new, 1 being failed, 2 being, I think that's very poor, versus 3 is poor.
I thought it was imminent failure.
Yeah, but don't we have records that that street was built in 1955
my point
or
is,
65?
in the case of those two streets, they're built in the early 19, I don't know if they actually were the 1890s, but they're somewhere around 1900 is when they were originally built. They may have had overlays, 30, 40 years ago, and then some chip seals after that, but it's been a long time. That's why they have the PACER ratings
Sure.
of 2 and 3.
But I, to the mayor's point, I think it is important that we let the citizens know that, your street, if we have the records, that, your street is 30 years old, let's just say. That type of information.
Good to have it by the hearing.
Yeah.
So that when you guys are
Right.
getting hit
Well,
with
and it is-
Well, we did Bowen. Somebody said it's only 10 years old.
Right.
You were able to pull out something that said, no, it was really
Right. And in,
34 or whatever it was.
Right,
So
and in
that was-
Parkway's thing, reconstruction, it's a petition from the residents. You have that listed, so the
Well,
residents wanted that street done.
But see, we in that case, it was a petition from the residents that came in with about 30%, which is why it never rose to getting on our list. It wasn't over 50%. There wasn't a neighborhood push for it.
Okay.
The utilities have now pushed it.
Okay.
And the PASER rating sure does it too.
That's correct.
True.
But especially streets that, take the Bone Street, for example, where that concrete is fairly good shape, but utilities need to be replaced. I think it is good that if we can give the citizens that information of how old or when their street was first, constructed, if it's 1974, 75, whatever it might be. Again, the more information we give them, I think the less we may get pushback at times from citizens.
I would also point out, it shows better on the bigger map, but on the map in your document, if somebody asks you, you can always look at the map. Anything with a black line in addition to the color code is a street that's PASER rated 1 through 3. So that gives you an idea. Those are the absolute most in need. And you can see that our goal is to get as many of the 1 through 3 rated streets done in the span of the CIP as possible. If they're not in the 5-year CIP, there's typically some very unusual circumstances that are accounting for that one not getting done. The other project that I want to point out, we're trying to, again, stay on top of some other projects. West New York Avenue was done last year, and we want to continue working our way east. This, you recall, it went up to Elmwood. Now it's going to go from Elmwood over to Wisconsin. That's the next phase of this. PASER rated 3. It's in pretty rough shape if you've driven that. That's pretty rough shape, and that's a 3. And I think you could probably on a good day twist Steve's arm to put it into a 2. It's pretty rough. But again, we need to get New York and keep pace with that project because we've got to go all the way through to Main Street with New York Avenue because in front of Merrill's,
it's horrible.
It's
probably
it's
as
even
bad
worse.
as anywhere.
It's
worse than this part.
It's worse than this. You're correct, but we got to get the utilities and everything's got to connect. So we got to work backwards from the river, and that's why Merrill, the surface, no question, Merrill's worse than this area, but you got to do it. You got to do a stage at a time. East Custer was a residence position, correct, Dave?
That's correct.
And
And
it's
that
paid-
had over 50%.
And it's a PASER rated 2.
That's correct.
And then Osceola is one that just was carried over with some stuff we've been doing with the university.
That being said, does the university pay for some of that since it borders, Titan Stadium and J.J. Keller Field and
Half
that?
of the project is accessible, and they own both sides. The answer is yes, sir. And they've known this one because this is a carryover, because we've been working on.
That was, we had to postpone it when we did the original sections
Right.
of Osceola in conjunction with Elmwood.
The university had not torn down Blackhawk Commons yet. That was still in the process of coming down. They weren't sure what they were going to put back up in that site versus having a new paved road be torn up to allow the construction of the new site. This has been left temporary.
Oh, wrong side of the river, come on. Okay. That's all right. I get confused easy. Thanks. Ooh. Ouch.
Just to kind of keep a flow, I would suggest after this, let's not jump to 2016 yet. I would just go to the new developments for 2015. Handful of subdivisions need to get finished. Those are funded. Hunter's Ridge, for example, that's all by the developer. We are starting to get a few residential areas that are starting to pop up. Furnow Avenue design, that is getting that project ready for eventual extension of Furnow between Vindeland and Jackson.
Is all the land on both sides of where that proposed road's going to be, is that all in the city now, or is some of that still in the town? Not yet.
Yeah, it's being reviewed at this time.
Okay.
And we have a handful of other subdivisions, and again, these are typically funded via assessment or some type of direct charge to the developer. So those are typically, when you get new development, that's being funded by an outside, but we're taking the lead.
I see you're doing some on Edgewood, and Edgewood was an issue out there for a long time with the developers. So we're okay there?
I wouldn't say that yet.
I would have to agree with Mark. I don't know if you have a comment, Steve. I don't know the most recent contacts we've had. I believe the bank now owns the lots.
Actually, Winnebago County.
You're correct.
Winnebago County has foreclosed on the lots and owns a good chunk of the lots. That will take care of some of the concerns we had with the foreclosure process occurring and not being able to recoup the assessments. We'll be looking at trying to come up with a way to assess 100% of the cost for the concrete pavement out here versus our standard policy of a third, because this is a new street that was supposed to go in with the subdivision. So we have to go through and work that through and come up with the means to assess that. We've gone through some iterations previously of looking at trip counts, because there's a pretty dense condominium association at the north end, but only has 60 feet of frontage, but is generating about half the traffic through the area. So trying to balance how to adequately and fairly assess the properties out there for the cost.
But these projects out there on Fraser and Hemlock should be okay, or are we going to have trouble collecting the assessments on them?
We're not going to do it unless we know we can collect the assessment. So
That
we
was
got it in here. And
big issue.
We got to work through with the county now and with the residents out there. Some of the residents feel betrayed by the developer. We have a responsibility to eventually get that street done. We really just have it in here as a place marker. And if things move along like we'd love to hope it would, but gosh, this might even been before you were.
No, it happened.
Before you were mayor.
Yeah, before I was mayor, it happened, but we've had those arguments. I just want to make sure that we're able to get the assessments, because they wanted us to hold the bag, both the banks and the citizens, so.
I think that's probably why the bank walked away from it, because they didn't want to, they didn't
And the
want the
developers.
bag.
Everybody walked away.
But the homeowners.
But the people who bought the homes out there, and
They came to us.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
The other question on Cope Avenue, that's that apartment complex that's planned?
The apartment complex that planned does not actually connect to Cope Avenue. Again, this is another placeholder that should the development to the south side, which is residential properties, come through and get some foothold and get started, that we have a project and a placeholder in here for that project. The apartment complex actually comes off of and connects off of Jack Tar and Soda Creek and does not connect directly to Cope.
I'm not holding my breath on that one either.
I understand there's some DNR problems. That apartment complex.
They are working through those right now and making some headway. So they're looking better than they were a month ago to move forward on that project.
If there's no questions about that, I'd ask that you go to 2016, the first couple pages in section, the 2016 section, page 2 through 7. These are our street and utility improvements, and you can see that this is, we're starting to ramp up, re-ramp up on streets because we're allocating a fixed portion. North Main Street is probably the biggest one. That is one that there's some grant money from DOT, not a ton, but about $500,000 of it. And the city's picking up a bulk of those costs, but this is from New York up to Murdoch. This is one that's been in the planning stages. It got delayed a little bit because of some federal requirements that Steve was pulling his hair out over. But that's one. Another phase of Bowen Street, in this case, we're going back all the way down to the river, and then we'll work our way back up. But the idea is to get the outfall at Bowen and get, you can see storm sewers. Good portion of that project, nearly half of the project is storm sewer. But there's also some sanitary and water there as well. And these aren't that old. The sanitary only goes back to 1936. So, but you can see it's still rough shape. The Pazer rating isn't as bad, and that's always a bone of contention. But it's really getting the utilities and getting the rest of Bowen Street to flow. That's really what we're trying to achieve here.
Really needing to get up to the next section of Bowen Street where the utilities date back to the early 1900s, and the last time we had to get in there and connect to them, once it was exposed, the pipe essentially turned to powder. So trying to get there before it does collapse.
Again, with the Pazer ratings being what they are, that's why it'd be helpful to have the year that the street was done, so we get some idea whether.
Dave, you got that? That's,
Yes.
Yeah, especially
We'll hear
these are the
about it.
ones that I think when you got a 2 or 3, you can be assured that age is very old. 4 and 6, you're getting into those. You're going to get cornered with questions. But the whole idea is we got to get up to the next phase. But the date is over. It's over 30 years old.
Bowen Street was originally paved in '68, so it's actually 46 years old. Yeah, but they have some streets that are actually in relatively good shape with a Pacer rating of a 4 versus a Pacer rating of a 2. But the utilities are not in good shape. So
Then I take it that some of this side streets leading up to Bowen are for connection purposes?
Yes, you're following very well. Thank you.
Oh, man.
Because on page
I
3,
hear this.
page 3 and 4, Mill Street, Otter, and CP are all connected, and that's part of you got to make it. You can't do those until you connect them. And those, as you can see, those are in rougher shape. But if you don't do Bowen, you can't do these other ones. So you got to do them together. But you can see now you're getting into storm sewer. Well, at least we're in the 20th century or 19th century. Yeah, 20th century. Excuse me. 1903, 1909. Water pre-1920s. Some pretty old stuff. And then a project on Bismarck. We've gotten several calls from a resident there who feels very strongly about getting that portion of Bismarck done, and I couldn't agree with them more. It's pretty rough shape. And then a handful of other streets. West Fernau, we had that discussion earlier. North Westfield, this is over by Evergreen, and Mr. Godey's been working with Mr. Arneson about coordinating all that and trying to do everything we can to get that project done. Mr. Arneson was hoping we could get some things done and said, why don't you wait until we get this street done before you start making some changes over there. They're doing some changes at Evergreen, and they were hoping to get us to accommodate them. When Ken saw the schedule that Steve had put together, he said, I think I'll wait. He doesn't want to waste his money either. And then Ripon Lane, this is the area over by LeSure's. It was just recently attached to the city. It's sort of behind Hyde and the carpet store there. That's in pretty rough shape, but it's really an issue of we've got to get the utilities in there because it's newly added to the city. They don't have city utilities.
And solve some drainage problems.
Yeah, we've gotten drainage complaints over the years about that. There is no age of infrastructure because it doesn't exist. There is no drainage there at all. So we could wait, but these folks just got attached to the city, and while they may not like the assessments, they would sure like us to take care of the drainage problems over there. And that's the 2016 streets, because there's a handful of new developments that are also there, but they're all going to depend on the developers.
Before you move on, Mark, let's take a break. It looks like we still have a ways to go before we go, and it's been a little over 2 hours, so let's take a...
We'll get to the
Try to
other
come back
streets.
about quarter after.
Very good.
The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. Please stay tuned for continued coverage. For broadcast times of local government meetings, check our website at oshkoshcommunitymedia.org. You're watching City Cable 10, your source for government programming in the Oshkosh area. Simulcast on 101.9 FM WOCT and streamed on the World Wide Web at oshkoshcommunitymedia.org. And streamed on the World Wide Web at oshkoshcommunitymedia.org.
We're back from break, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Roloff again.
We're back to other street projects for 2015. That's on page 2015-10. Virtually all of these items are items that are going to be paid for with levy as opposed to borrowing. You'll recall North Main Street we talked about for 2016. We need to do that land acquisition as required by the federal government as part of the grant. So we've got the land acquisition that we're going to be acquiring in 2015. Our concrete pavement repair program, $150,000 that we've got in there. And on page 11, we're trying to be a little more proactive for our future street projects by getting some of the environmental work done, subsurface work, just televising, just advanced work done, so that our future year projects can go better. So try to get it done in the year before for the future year projects. We're getting budget approval for that right now. Next Tuesday, we're going to be asking for this same work to be done for the 2015 projects so we can get going on it. It's much more valuable for us to get bids out earlier and maybe get better bids if we do some of this work in advance. So going one step beyond what we're doing this year is we want to get it approved in the budget and get working on it right now. Now that's $395,000, so that covers every CIP that we have planned for 2016. But that'll be money well spent because we can bid that out now and then give the firms that we hire more time to get that done and just get better bids. Did I state that fairly, Dave? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And you're going to fund that through revenue, quite a bit of it through revenue bonds?
We will borrow for these projects. There's, I guess, some of it's funded through.
You're seeing that it's related to the, a lot of it's related to the utilities. So on that page, 2015-11.
Those are going to be funded through.
Okay, 395 is, okay.
395 is going to be borrowed, but all the other projects are going to be funded with levy dollars.
Okay.
And that ties in with this page that Trina provided you earlier. And then similarly, in 2016, if you want to go to 2016-10, similar type of situation. Give me a second to get over there. Asphalt mill and overlay, we're not doing anything next year, is that?
That's correct.
So we've always tried to have a multifaceted pavement management system. So if we're reconstructing, we're doing the concrete pavement, but we do have some asphalt streets with curb and gutter that we could do a mill and overlay on. Then we have the cold mix program in the operating fund, operating budget, and then we also want to make sure we're looking at concrete pavement repairs on our arterials and collectors, and sometimes local streets. So we try to fix all different types of pavement.
Generally, what kind of life are you getting out of these mill and overlay projects, Dave?
Well, and it varies. So we've done mill and overlay in the university on Algoma and High Avenue, and we might get 15 years out of a location like that. But in a low-volume traffic residential street, we're getting probably more of the 25 to 30 years. So it really depends on the location.
And then you can see the other projects are really just a continuation of what we discussed already in 2015, just staying concrete repair and getting ready for 2017. If there's no questions, we've got some other utility projects only for 2015, but it's on page 2015-13. Burnwood Drive is another area that was
Attached.
Recently attached, was that Dave?
That was the 2013 Town of Algoma agreement, boundary agreement.
So we have it in here. The residents a while back asked us that we delay doing this project. I'm not sure if there have been any more requests for hookups. I expressed to the residents there that while there's no burning need to redo this unless we start having a track record, we want to be ready. If there's a track record that these streets or these utilities need to be added in, we can't wait any longer. Some of the folks would prefer to wait indefinitely, but if we start seeing a pattern, we got to get them all in. I'm not sure if we've had a pattern.
I knew there was at least the one property that had a failing septic system. I haven't talked to the plumbing inspector lately to know whatever happened with that situation, but it's also some looping of water main, for fire flows in the area. So it's a combination lateral project and water main project.
I would say for the most part, but not universally, these folks would prefer this project get delayed. But we have to be ready to do this project just in case we start to see a rapid failure of these things. And I say rapid, we start getting a pattern of these things. We've got to tell everybody, look, we're sorry that you think you don't need it, but your neighbors need it, and we can't do this in piecemeal fashion. We need to get it done.
And I think their big concern is once we cut the budget in, it must have been in 13, and we had it proposed as an assessment project, and that's their real concern, is they want to be able to pay it off over time.
And the other ones, Butler Avenue over near the Winnebago Mental Health Institute, and then Stearns Drive, some other ones that are just overdue to get done with subdivision work or some extension of old utilities that aren't ours. And that's it for other utilities. There are no other utilities projects projected for 2016. So if there's no questions there, stormwater would be the next one. Page 16 and 2015, just turn another page over, and you'll see our big project for stormwater getting started in 2015. Fernal Avenue watershed, that's the one that was associated with Perfect Seal. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes.
So that'll Bemis Healthcare Packaging. Thank you. 9th and Washburn, that's the property we acquired several years ago. There is a small grant with that of $150,000. It's not a lot, but this is, help me out, Dave, this is a Campbell Creek project, right?
That's correct.
Yes. But this is the property that we acquired several years ago. It's just a matter of, that's the next one in our Campbell Creek watershed area. 3rd Avenue outfall, relatively minor one, but again, when you talk about 120 watersheds, this is a small watershed, but there's no infrastructure there, so we want to get it out of there as soon as possible.
Well, we had upgraded the storm sewer as part of the central garage project. We just need now to get the water to the river. We got to upgrade to Witzel. Now we need to get it to the river.
This will help alleviate some flooding along Witzel Avenue during the heavier events, as well as take a little bit of load off Ohio Street, as it will redirect some of that out to the river versus crossing under Ohio Street and heading out to the east.
And then Stringham Creek, getting the process started. Stringham Creek is essentially South Park Avenue. Is that a fair way to say it?
Pretty close, yes.
So land acquisition, getting the projects, identifying those. What's the status of analyzing the Stringham Creek watershed?
That is
currently under analysis.
Right.
So once that analysis is done, then we'll identify properties that need to get acquired. But everybody knows about this one. This is Ohio Street, south of 9th. This is where some of the quickest flooding happens, some of the most visible flooding happens, and all the work we've done everywhere else isn't going to do anything for that. This is where we start. We start with land acquisition.
Is this one being done in I guess in coordination with the South Park master plan that was just passed this past year? I know Mr. Mauer's here, but there was, I see some dredging, and I know the lagoons were going to be redesigned in South Park, at least as part of that master plan that was developed.
We were coordinating with Parks Department on the design.
Actually, if you look on page 20, there's another project for South Park.
Unfortunately, the land area available in South Park isn't enough to really make a major impact on the stormwater management. It's great for flood control, or not flood, pardon me, for a water quality type situation. A couple years back, when there was some funding available for some low moderate income impacts, we looked at South Park, and essentially we would have had to taken all of South Park and turned it into a detention basin, and I mean all of South Park into a detention basin, and had very minimal flood control impact. So
but we are looking at doing some improvements at the park. Not so much for detention, but for quality.
Yes, we're certainly looking at coordinating with them to do some bank stabilization, some improvements that way.
And we were working with them as part of their park study.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And there's a handful of other projects. Libby Watershed, we acquired some land a while back, and we're going to be working on the design for that project. Again, we bounced a couple things around. This was going to get done earlier, but with the Fernau Avenue one for the new TIF, those things got shuffled around. But we'll be working on the design now that we have the land over there. And then a handful of projects at Gallops, Merritt's Creek, Glatz Creek. You can see. Well, Steve, why don't you describe the Glatz Creek one? Because it's not on a street per se.
Which one are we on?
On page 20.
It was funded this year, but so it's under a funded in prior year but not constructed. So that's a continuation of our 23rd Avenue relief sewer?
Correct. We need to work with the airport and FAA to get easements through the airport in order to try to extend that from the westerly end of 23rd Avenue through the airport, and then eventually pick up the drainage channel that comes from the outlet mall. The outlet shops is actually the upper end, one of the upper reaches of this, and trying to get the large channel that comes there and get that redirected, get it away from 20th Avenue and through a pipe and out to the lake.
And where does this connect up at before it gets to the lake?
With the project that was done last year on 23rd and 24th Avenue, that was put in, the large box culvert was put in under that street as it was reconstructed to be set up for this.
I just wanted council to be aware that the reward for putting, you had to endure a lot of complaints about that project, and this is your reward, because this will really be the icing on the cake for the Gladys Creek area.
And actually, I think the flooding in the airport area was one of the first areas noted for flood studies. It was in the late 80s, like 88, 89. I think that was the first study that was done.
So this one, you hear stories about 20th Avenue, how bad it is. This is the next phase to get 20th Avenue taken care of. Now, with that said, it's about $8.7 million in stormwater utility projects, and those are the utility projects, not including storm sewer for the streets that we're doing. So still a heavy investment in there. And when we get to 2016, which I would encourage you, if we could go to 2016-12, just get a continuation, get a flow, pardon the pun, a flow of the projects that are needed to keep the infrastructure going. You can see a continuation. Libby Watershed, the idea would be to do that project in 2016 after we get the design in 2015. For now, the land acquisition.
Additional land.
It's going to take some time. In fact, we're probably going to be coming to you relatively soon.
For the first basin, but this would deal with, I think there's as much as 3 different locations where stormwater detention is proposed in the Fernal watershed.
And then Gallup's Merits, land acquisition, and just continuing some of those projects. A Johnson Creek watershed study. That's in the south end of town.
Correct.
Yes, south of the airport.
And those are our big projects for 2016. But you can see the pattern that goes. That we study the area, design, land acquisition, construction. There's no questions there. Wastewater is our next project area. Look back to 2015-22. These are projects that are related specifically to the wastewater. Dave, I'm not as familiar with these projects.
Okay, so we had a number of projects that cropped up over last winter, specifically on the first one there on 6th Avenue. We have I think it's a 3-foot deep sanitary sewer that actually was so shallow that it had bad pitch and full of water, froze, and needed some repair. Similar to Fairlawn, we have discovered a sewer that's not as shallow. I think that one might be more in the 4 to 5 foot depth, but also had some damaged pipe in need of repair. On page 23, we've got Nebraska. That's an area near the South Shore redevelopment area where, with some upgrades to future streets in the future, we would need to reroute some sanitary sewers in the area. 12th Avenue, some more failing sanitary sewer down in the area of Knapp Street and Rugby. On page 24, we have a very deep sanitary sewer, which has had problems with the riser sections of the lateral collapsing just based on the procedure used for the original installation. So I've been dealing with the insurance company, and they're recommending that we get those laterals fixed correctly so that the property owners aren't having continual problems and filing claims. We continue then on the bottom of page 24. We're always doing our inflow infiltration removal program. And I talked a little bit about the project now I'm on page 25. We have a large project coming on Oregon Street that's related to the Southside Sanitary Sewer Study. We're the next project on Snell Road.
Dave, if you want to talk about that one, just because that's also on the streets, because that one has come up
Well, that
relatively
one,
recently.
right. That was, and if you have your book from last year and you looked at this map that we gave you last year, you'd see that there were a lot of colors last year on Bowen. Now this year, based on some modeling we did, based on an administrative order from EPA, we did a bunch of review of our sanitary sewers, did some modeling, determined where there were locations that needed improvement, and Oregon popped up as one of those. And so based on that, we prioritized it and put Bowen as a lower priority, put Oregon as a higher priority. And that's a location where we have a number of lift stations. We talked about Waukau earlier, but we also have lift stations at 28th, and I believe we have another lift station at 17th Ave. And so there's a lot of coordination with the extension of that main interceptor with the paving project to possible renovations to different lift stations. So
That's huge, and you can see that the street impact on that will eventually hit, because once we do the study, we're going to say, okay, we got to redo the sewers, and once we do redo the sewers that extensively, the streets are getting done.
And so there's a section of Oregon that originally was done, I think, around the mid-'90s with an overlay. Otherwise, it's a very old street, but it had an asphalt overlay, 20-plus years ago. And if you drive on Oregon at all, you'll know that 20 years on a main street with an asphalt overlay, it's showing its age. As far as the pavement goes.
So this is just the study part, but it's setting the stage for some major work to get done the next few years. Snell Road Interceptor.
Snell Road Interceptor, that's, we have a project we're working on right now. There's a lift station in the area of, Stearns and Snell, in that, or Omni Drive and Snell in that area, where we're doing an upgrade to a lift station that's on the west side of 41, hoping, I believe, our intent is to eliminate this lift station on the east side of 41, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so, to do that, then we need this interceptor to connect. Mark?
A lot of that capacity from the prison's actually going to the south right now, to the east, down
Jackson Street, and causing some problems in the Furnow Avenue, Jackson Street area, and that's another reason why we're looking at this project.
And if the property owners out there ever wanted to do any development, expansion out there, right now, we wouldn't have the ability to accommodate them. This way, we'll send the sewage from the prison to the west, over to 41, over to the industrial area, and then shoot it south down Algoma, right?
That's correct.
So then that'll give us opportunities. If somebody wants to come and develop on the west side of Jackson, they'll be able to do it. Right now, we'd have a little bit of a capacity issue.
And then the last project on page 26, we always have a continuing project to rehab sanitary sewers, whether we're doing things like lining projects or grouting, because there are some sanitary sewers that don't need to be reconstructed, but we can do maintenance or a rehab to extend the useful life of that sanitary sewer. And
That also helps with I&I as well.
That's correct. That's the purpose. And we've done a number of those. I can't remember if we've done at least 2 lining projects. I think we've.
Yes, we've done, I believe, 2 lining projects. This could also branch into doing lateral lining as well, if we look at that as get more data on the amount of infiltration coming in from private lateral to public mains.
And then I'll spare you for 2016. The only 2 projects we have in there are the I&I and the sanitary sewer rehab at $500,000. So we don't have any major projects proposed there. I think some of that was because of cash flow issues, right? So again, the sanitary sewer utility, we got to watch it. We can't overdo it in terms of over borrowing and getting ourselves in that debt coverage issue. We've got to have so much revenue to cover our debt, and if we have too much debt, we're not going to have enough income to cover that. So,
But that's something that I think, I'm trying to remember, who is the, it's not Springstead, it's Ellers, was doing an analysis with the water utility and the wastewater utility to make sure that we can, have proper rate increases to properly fund the operations.
So we can balance out our rate coverage as well as our actual rates and with our debt. So we're managing the 3 of them together and looking at them long term and giving us a more secure plan of where we're headed.
any questions on sewer, wastewater? If not, we've got a water utility projects. Does it just specific to water on page 2015-29? Pretty small projects.
We had one river crossing of Sawyer Creek that broke, I believe it was last year, and to provide proper fire flows in the area, we're proposing a project to reconnect it.
This helps loop it.
This helps loop the area. That's correct.
And then
the one on page 30 is funded this year but not constructed. So another looping for fire flow. Yes.
And those are the only two projects we have that are just specific to water. And then, if there are no questions there, our last set of projects are sidewalks, page 32 and 33. They're pretty much our maintenance type of programs, our sidewalk rehab and reconstruction at $500,000. Most of that's assessed, but a good portion of it is paid for by us. You can see that that's one of the the levy projects that we're doing. Of the $500,000, 165 is city contribution. We're proposing to use the levy for that, as well as the new sidewalk ordered in and anything with the subdivision. So we assess for most of it, but we do pick up a small portion of it.
If we're dealing like the city cost would be like for handicap ramps.
And those conclude our projects. There's also projects in 16, but essentially it's the same thing. It's a duplicate. We just have those projects as place markers. And with that, those are the projects in the CIP. I know we've gone through $50 million in capital improvements in roughly 2.5 hours. Hopefully, through our planning process, you've been able to know that some of these projects have been going on. There's a few that are a little new to you, but when we've talked about Bowen, I wanted Dave to talk about Oregon, because next year when we're doing this, we want to make sure that these things are on your radar screen, even though if we have to remind you, it's just, oh yeah, I remember that from the previous year. We obviously have to watch our debt, not just with general obligation, but with our utilities. We're doing that. Trying to take advantage of grants when we can, putting some cash in when we can, both in the general fund as well as the other utilities. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Questions? I would commend you for the presentation, the format, and everything over the last 2 years has been better. And the 2-year plan, I think, can be helpful to us, and should be helpful to you guys, and should be helpful to the citizens. Because now we
Thank you. It's kind of a
really a 2-year rather than a 1-year, so I know it puts more pressure on them now, but it should make it easier for them next year.
Thank you for saying it to reinforce that it was well worth the hassle that we put you guys through. So thank you, Mr.
I think
Mayor.
you'll make it up later, though, in terms of time, rather than starting from sort of scratch again.
Absolutely. To me, even with this process, I mean, Dave and Steve did the whole 5-year. If you want to go through the streets match up to 3.8 million. They match up to the map. And I think there's a lot of value for that. So you're right. It's gonna help us as we do planning. It's not. I can guarantee you that it will not be identical next year. There will be tweaks, but it's easier to shift gears when you know how you've prioritized it in the first place. So thank you.
Other items related to the operating budget?
At this point, if there's nothing else we need to report at this time. We are finalizing that amount that we mentioned, little changes here and there that we've picked up during the course of our budget work sessions. Mentioned we found a couple things that were in both the CIP and the operating because of the cash issue. I think we're ready to have the pre-final discussion with council in terms of where you want to start addressing the budget. No big changes at this point. We're going to have a handful of changes. They're probably looking at plus or minus $100,000, but it's primarily going to be to the good when all is said and done. So that'll be levy reduction as well as a little expenditure restraint relief. I would say, regardless of what the council does, if for example you make some expenditure cuts, we want to make sure that we get up to the expenditure restraint line as tight as possible. That will protect us for future years. Last week we had talked about the unclassified account with our uncollectible accounts. We'll probably use that as a float because that one you never know if it's going to go up or down. We'll use that to get ourselves up to expenditure restraint limits. So if you cut something, we'll make sure that we backfill it so that we don't jeopardize our expenditure restraint capability for the future. And we'll probably use it with that area.
Does that impact the levy, though?
If we go above it, it could impact our expenditure restraint payment. But in terms of the levy, what that does is it gives us capacity for future years. It doesn't help us this year. It'll just help us in future years.
And with that portion of the budget, I guess what I'm asking, I mean, are we looking at a preset amount in order to stay at that expenditure restraint, or if you're going to use that tool of the uncollectible accounts? Is that if you raise that or lower that for the purposes of meeting the expenditure restraint requirements, does that account have an impact on them?
No. What we'll likely do is put in another offsetting revenue so that it doesn't impact the levy. Thank you for asking. That's key to that. And actually, one of the amount that we put in for engineering reimbursements, that's usually the revenue will adjust as well. So it won't have a levy impact at all.
Okay, the question is, do we want to have another meeting? We have last year. We found it helpful, but it's up to the group. We need to take the budget up for consideration on the 25th. So it's between now and the 25th. What are people's druthers?
I would think one more.
Huh?
Yeah.
I would think one more meeting.
Look at the 18th.
Trick is,
I can, just as a suggestion, and again, some of it depends, we have a very light agenda for next Tuesday. There's the public hearing on the budget. Generally, we'll have a couple, 3 people on that. There's the bid issue, which I'm going to recommend they actually get held over because the bid wants to meet with me on the 18th, and I'm happy to do that. So I don't know how much discussion you will or won't have. I'm aware that bid members are calling you, so be that as it may, that is really the only substantive thing we have on the agenda. We do have a closed session, so it depends on how long you plan to spend in closed session. I think we'll get done with the bulk of our agenda within an hour. So if you want to do it then, that's another opportunity for you.
What are people?
I like that option. I'd prefer that as opposed to another night, because I think we may be hard-pressed to find one that's going to work for all of us with this kind of notice.
Okay, what we're looking at doing is looking at the budget and coming up with people who are going to have ideas about recommendations for amendments to the budget one way or another, adding or subtracting as the case may be, given what the budget is now, so people would at least get those out. We've got to be careful that we don't take action on those, and so we can't say, do we agree on this cut ahead of time, because in essence we'd be having an inappropriate open meeting. So it's really throwing those ideas out, and then those ideas would go to Trina and Mark, and they would prepare a series of amendments which would get out early to us, and we could look at them ahead of time. And then they would also be prepared for telling us what effect on the levy it would have at that time, so that's helpful to them. Again, further amendments can be made at any time. They can be made the night of the meeting on the 25th. But at least this will give us some idea for the mood, and plus it'll give an opportunity to ask for further questions. Is that clear enough in terms of what we'd be doing?
Yeah, Mayor, just a quick question. I mean, we've
I'll
been taking notes these last couple of workshops. If we have some proposals, is it fair to email Mr. Roloff at this point so that he can have that?
You can do them or get them then.
Or would it be better to bring it up at the meeting?
I think Tuesday. I
think Tuesday to bring it up, but then what may happen as a result of that meeting, in some discussion, you may come up with some additional proposals, and then we would say email those. I think that happened last time. There were a few additional ones that went. So the meeting next week may bring up some things in your own mind. So I don't think it's necessary to do between now and next Tuesday, but after Tuesday, if you have some additional ones, that's fair game. In fact, if you got an idea of something you want to do, proposal for addition, subtraction, the idea would be to email them so they can get it on a sheet ahead of time. So when we meet, so on that Friday before, we'll see most of what those proposals are and can think about them the way we would tend to view them. As I say, we just have to be careful next Tuesday not to say, well, do we have a consensus on this idea?
Have
So they're kind of individual
menu
proposals.
of options.
Menu of options.
And the advantage, you're going to have 2 weeks then between that and the meeting at which you would vote on those things. So if other things come to mind at that point, then I would absolutely want to get feedback from you. If something comes to mind middle of the night, you want to, don't call me then. Just email me. But yeah, we can get those in there and incorporate them.
And you'd probably want to do that within a week, so they have a week, or they have some days to put them together.
Right.
And I assume we'll be all here on the 25th, because Thanksgiving is 2 days after that. We'll all be here.
Yep. We have to be here. We really have to get the budget approved on that particular date. Otherwise, we're in trouble for getting the bills out so on. That's correct. I do believe that it really has to be done that night. Okay. Thanks for everybody's patience.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. It's been a couple of tough weeks.
Thank you.
Session on that.